The fluorescent lights of Bronx General Hospital buzzed overhead as Beatrice Alana Whitman finished her 16th hour on shift. Her shoulders ached from the weight of responsibility, both physical and emotional, as she changed out of her scrubs into a loose grey sweater and worn jeans. The locker room mirror reflected what she already knew. Exhaustion had carved itself into the corners of her deep brown eyes. "You're doing too much, baby girl," her mother's voice echoed in her mind, the Haitian Creole accent as clear as if Gloria were standing beside her. Beatrice smiled despite her fatigue, touching the small gold pendant her mother had given her for graduation. The familiar motion centered her as it always did. Outside, the October night wrapped around her like a cold blanket. Beatrice pulled her oversized sweater closer, fishing her earbuds from her backpack. Lauryn Hill's voice filled her ears as she walked to the bus stop, her worn sneakers scuffing against the concrete. The city at night was a different creature, all neon signs and shadows, promises and warnings intertwined. Bus 84 arrived with a mechanical wheeze, its doors opening like a tired yawn. Beatrice climbed aboard, her monthly pass worn and familiar in her hand. The bus was unusually empty for 11 p.m., with only a scattered handful of passengers. Her usual spot, middle section window seat, beckoned like an old friend. She didn't notice him at first. Wesley Elijah Thorne sat in the aisle seat of her preferred row, his tall frame slightly cramped in the limited space. His expensive suit looked out of place, like a silk thread in cotton fabric. His tie hung loose around his neck, and the top two buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, small acts of rebellion against his usual perfect composure. Beatrice hesitated for a fraction of a second before sliding into the window seat. The bus lurched forward, and she instinctively grabbed her backpack tighter, holding it against her chest like a shield. Lauryn Hill's voice continued to whisper in her ears, "How you gonna win when you ain't right within?" The rhythm of the bus, the warmth of her sweater, and 16 hours of non-stop movement began to take their toll. Her eyelids grew heavy, each blink lasting longer than the last. She fought it as she always did, but exhaustion won. Her head tilted slowly, inexorably, until it found rest against something firm and warm. Wesley Thorne had been staring straight ahead, his mind replaying the disastrous business dinner he'd just fled. The sudden weight on his shoulder startled him out of his thoughts. He looked down to find a mass of perfectly coiled curls, pulled back in a messy bun that was now coming undone. His first instinct was to move, to wake her, to restore the proper distance between strangers. But he didn't. Something about her complete abandonment, the trust of exhaustion, held him still. He caught a faint scent of hospital antiseptic mixed with something sweeter, coconut maybe. Her backpack was clutched tight against her chest even in sleep, and he noticed the worn edges of a paperback book peeking out. For the first time in years, Wesley felt the world slow down. The constant whir of thoughts in his head, meetings, deadlines, expectations, faded to a distant hum. There was only the gentle weight on his shoulder, the rhythm of her breathing, and the strange peace that settled over him like fresh snow. The bus continued its journey through the Bronx streets, passing under streetlights that painted everything in alternating gold and shadow. Each time they hit a bump, Wesley tensed slightly, trying to keep still so she wouldn't wake. He found himself holding his breath whenever the bus stopped, irrationally worried that she might choose that moment to leave. 15 minutes passed like this, a lifetime of small moments. Wesley noticed things he usually ignored, the way the city lights played across the bus windows, the soft murmur of conversations in Spanish from the back seats, the gentle sway of the bus that seemed to rock them both in a strange urban lullaby. When her stop approached, he knew because she began to stir. Wesley felt an unfamiliar pang in his chest. She lifted her head slowly, disorientation clouding her features for a moment before awareness rushed in. Her eyes widened, and a deep blush colored her cheeks as she realized what had happened. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with sleep and embarrassment. "I didn't mean to—" "It's fine," Wesley replied, his voice softer than he'd intended. Their eyes met briefly, her warm brown meeting his steel blue, before she quickly looked away. Beatrice gathered her things with fumbling hands, nearly dropping her phone in her haste to stand. She mumbled another apology as she squeezed past him, her sweater brushing against his knees. Wesley watched as she hurried to the front of the bus, her backpack clutched tight against her chest once again. Just before stepping off, she glanced back. Their eyes met one last time, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the strange intimacy they'd just shared. Then she was gone, swallowed by the night and the city. Wesley sat there, his shoulder still warm from her touch, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted in the universe. He reached up and straightened his tie, a habitual gesture that felt hollow now. The rest of the ride passed in a blur, his mind replaying the weight of her head on his shoulder, the soft sound of her breathing, the look in her eyes when she'd woken. Later that night, in his pristine Manhattan loft, Wesley stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. His reflection stared back at him, successful, polished, alone. He touched his shoulder, where her head had rested, and felt the ghost of that warmth. For the first time in years, the silence of his apartment felt wrong. Across the city, in her small Bronx apartment, Beatrice crept in quietly to avoid waking her mother. She found Gloria asleep in her recliner, prayer beads loose in her lap. Carefully, she draped a blanket over her mother's shoulders, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Ou tuo bon pour moi," Gloria murmured in her sleep. "You're too good to me." Beatrice smiled, but her mind wandered back to the bus, to the stranger in the expensive suit who had let her sleep on his shoulder. She touched her cheek, still warm with embarrassment, and felt something else there too, a lingering sensation of peace, of safety, that she couldn't quite explain. Neither of them could have known then how this accidental moment of connection would change everything. But sometimes the biggest storms start with the smallest shifts in pressure, the slightest change in the wind. And in the vast city of New York, two souls who should never have met had just been set on a collision course with destiny. The night wrapped around them both, keeper of their secret, guardian of this first chapter in a story neither of them knew they were beginning to write. Morning light filtered through the blinds of Wesley's corner office on the 42nd floor of the Thorne Publishing Building in Manhattan. He stood at the window, coffee untouched on his desk, watching the city wake up. His fingers absently traced the shoulder where, just hours ago, a stranger had rested her head. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Lana Hartley announced, striding into his office without knocking. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in its signature sleek ponytail, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with practiced precision. Wesley turned, composing his features into their usual mask of calm authority. "Good morning to you too, Lana. Don't good morning me." She perched on the edge of his desk, studying him with the shrewd gaze that had made her one of New York's most formidable communications directors. "You missed 3 texts about the Hanson acquisition, and you're wearing the same suit as yesterday." "I took the bus home." Lana's perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up. "I'm sorry, you what?" "The bus. Public transportation. Really quite efficient, actually." "Wesley Elijah Thorne took public transportation?" Lana let out a laugh that echoed off the glass walls. "What happened to Michael?" "Family emergency." Wesley finally sat down, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. It was enlightening. Lana's expression softened. She'd known Wesley long enough to read the subtle shifts in his demeanor. "Something happened on that bus, didn't it?" Before he could answer, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Thorne, the board is waiting in conference room A." "We're not done with this conversation," Lana warned as they walked to the meeting. Wesley merely nodded, his mind already drifting back to warm brown eyes and the scent of coconut. Across the city, Beatrice was starting her morning shift at Bronx General. She'd managed 4 hours of sleep before her alarm dragged her back to consciousness. Now she moved through the emergency room with practiced efficiency, checking vitals and changing IVs. "Girl, you look like you're sleepwalking," Nurse Martinez commented, handing her a patient chart. "Rough night?" Beatrice accepted the chart, trying to focus on the numbers instead of the memory of steel blue eyes. "Just tired." Martinez wasn't convinced. "That's why you've been staring at the same blood pressure reading for 5 minutes? Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. I did something embarrassing on the bus last night. Please tell me you didn't flash anyone." "What? No!" Beatrice laughed despite herself. "I fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder." "That's it? Baby, in New York that barely counts as a story." Martinez patted her arm. Though was he at least cute? Before Beatrice could answer, the ER doors burst open with a new arrival. Both women snapped into professional mode, rushing to assist. The morning dissolved into a blur of patients, procedures, and paperwork. During her lunch break, Beatrice called home to check on her mother. "Mon trésor." Gloria's voice was warm through the phone. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, Manman." Beatrice picked at her salad, guilt gnawing at her for the small lie. "Did you take your medicine?" "Always with the medicine?" Gloria clicked her tongue. "I raised you to care for others, but sometimes I think you care too much." "That's impossible." Beatrice smiled, hearing the familiar creaks of their apartment in the background. Someone taught me that love is never too much. Ah, but love for others must come from love for yourself first. Gloria paused, and Beatrice could picture her adjusting her reading glasses. You seem different today. Your voice has a new color. Beatrice's hand went to her shoulder, remembering the warmth of the stranger's suit jacket. I'm just tired, Manman. No, this is not tired. This is something else. Gloria's tone turned knowing. Did you meet someone? I have to go, Manman, more patients waiting. Bon dia vabau salve merite, Gloria said softly. God will give you what you deserve. Be careful with your heart, mon trésor. Back in Manhattan, Wesley sat through meeting after meeting, his usual laser focus compromised by recurring thoughts of the bus ride. During a brief break, he found himself Googling Bus 84 Bronx route on his phone, memorizing the stops and times. Stalking public transportation now? Lana's voice made him jump. She handed him a coffee and settled into the chair across from his desk. Spill it, Thorne. What's got you so rattled? Wesley set his phone down, choosing his words carefully. Have you ever had a moment that felt significant? Not in any tangible way, but the Ice King of Manhattan is talking about feelings? Lana leaned forward. Now I'm worried. It was nothing. Wesley straightened his tie. A woman fell asleep on my shoulder on the bus, that's all. That's all. Lana's eyes narrowed. You who once made an intern cry for breathing too loudly during a presentation? That was different. He was being human. Lana's expression softened. Wes, when was the last time you let anyone get close? Really close? The question hung in the air between them. Wesley's eyes drifted to the framed photo on his desk, himself and his sister Claire, laughing at some forgotten joke. The picture was taken 3 months before the accident that took her life. I should prepare for the next meeting, he said quietly. Lana stood, recognizing the dismissal. At the door, she paused. You know, sometimes the universe has a weird way of giving us what we need, even if we think we don't want it. After she left, Wesley opened his drawer and pulled out one of Claire's old letters. Her looping handwriting filled the page. Big brother, you can't control everything. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we don't plan for. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his office as Wesley made a decision. He picked up his phone and called Michael, his driver. Take the evening off, he said. I'll be taking the bus again. At Bronx General, Beatrice's shift was winding down. She changed back into her street clothes, this time a worn NYU hoodie and leggings. Her curls were completely free now, forming a halo around her tired face. You heading to the bus? Martinez asked as they walked out together. Beatrice nodded, ignoring the way her heart jumped at the word bus. Girl, you need your own car. These hours aren't safe, says the woman who takes the subway at 4 a.m. Beatrice bumped her friend's shoulder. Besides, the bus is fine. Martinez studied her face. This wouldn't have anything to do with your shoulder pillow from last night. Of course not. Beatrice adjusted her backpack. He was probably some Wall Street guy slumming it for a night, probably has a driver and a penthouse and you've clearly thought about this not at all. Martinez grinned. Well, maybe lightning will strike twice. Beatrice watched her friend head toward the subway, then turned toward the bus stop. The evening air was cooler than last night, carrying the first hints of winter. She pulled out her earbuds, but instead of her usual playlist, she found herself walking in silence, listening to the city's heartbeat. At the bus stop, she couldn't help scanning the faces of waiting passengers. Her heart did a strange little flip when she saw a tall man in a suit, but it wasn't him. Of course it wasn't. She was being ridiculous. Bus 84 arrived right on schedule, its doors opening with the same tired wheeze. Beatrice boarded, swiping her pass, and made her way to her usual spot. The seat felt different now, charged with the memory of last night. She sat down, placed her backpack in her lap, and began her nightly ritual of pretending to read while actually fighting sleep. But tonight, her mind kept wandering to the warmth of a stranger's shoulder and the gentleness of his voice when he said, "It's fine." What she didn't know was that 20 blocks away, Wesley Thorne was boarding another Bus 84, heading in the opposite direction, searching for a connection he couldn't explain and wasn't sure he wanted to find. Sometimes the city has a way of keeping people apart, even when they're looking for each other. And sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen. A pause, a breath, before the universe decides it's time for paths to cross again. The night settled over New York like a velvet curtain, and somewhere between Manhattan and the Bronx, two people thought about each other and the strange intimacy of public transportation, wondering if some moments are meant to be just that, moments perfect in their brevity, significant in their simplicity. But fate, as they would soon learn, had other plans. The emergency room of Bronx General buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. Beatrice moved between beds with practiced grace, checking vitals and updating charts. 3 days had passed since the bus incident, but the memory lingered like a song she couldn't shake. "Code Blue, we need hands in Bay 4. The call jolted Beatrice from her thoughts. She rushed toward the commotion, where paramedics were wheeling in a man in an expensive suit. Blood stained his shirt sleeve, and his face was contorted in pain. Male, mid-30s, deep laceration to the right forearm, glass injury from office accident, the paramedic reported. BP 130/85, pulse 92. Beatrice helped transfer him to the bed, already assessing the wound. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" "Oliver Reed," the man grimaced. "I work at Thorn Publishing. Someone should call." "Less talking, more treating," Dr. Patel interrupted, sweeping in to examine the injury. "Good catch, Whitman. Start an IV and prep for sutures." Beatrice worked quickly, her hands steady as she inserted the IV line. The name Thorn Publishing echoed in her mind, but she pushed the thought away. New York was full of publishing houses. "Mr. Reed?" A deep voice cut through the ER noise. "I came as soon as I heard." Beatrice's hands froze. She knew that voice. Wesley Thorn stood in the doorway, his tall frame commanding attention, even in the chaos of the emergency room. His eyes swept the scene, landing first on his injured employee, then shifting to Beatrice. Recognition flickered across his face. Their gazes locked for a heartbeat too long. "Mr. Thorn," Oliver managed, "I'm so sorry about the Anderson manuscripts. They're replaceable, you're not." Wesley moved closer, his presence filling the small space. His shoulder brushed against Beatrice's as she finished securing the IV, and she felt the contact like an electric current. "Doctor." "Patel," Beatrice said, her voice surprisingly steady. "The IV's ready." "Good. Now help me with these sutures." Dr. Patel glanced at Wesley. "Mr. Thorn." "Wesley Thorn." "Mr. Thorn, you can wait outside. We'll take good care of your employee." Wesley hesitated, his eyes finding Beatrice's again. "Of course. I'll be right outside, Oliver." Beatrice felt his absence like a change in air pressure. She focused on assisting Dr. Patel, trying to ignore the lingering warmth where their shoulders had touched. In the waiting area, Wesley paced. His phone buzzed constantly. Lana, board members, his assistant, but he ignored them all. His mind kept replaying the look of surprise on her face, the professional calm in her voice, so different from her sleepy embarrassment on the bus. An hour later, Beatrice emerged from the treatment area. She had to talk to him. It was protocol to update family or employers on patient status. Her feet felt heavy as she approached. "Mr. Thorn?" Wesley turned, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Up close, she noticed the faint stubble on his jaw, the slight loosening of his tie, small cracks in his perfect facade. "How is he?" Wesley asked, his voice softer than before. 23 stitches, but he'll be fine. No nerve damage." Beatrice handed him some papers. "These are his discharge instructions. He'll need to follow up with his primary care physician in a week." "Thank you." Wesley paused, searching for a name tag. "Beatrice," she supplied. "Beatrice Whitman." "Thank you, Beatrice." The way he said her name made it sound like poetry. A stretcher clattered past, breaking the moment. Beatrice took a step back, professional distance reasserting itself. "He'll be out shortly. Someone should drive him home. I'll take care of it." Wesley pulled out his phone. "Beatrice?" She paused. "About the other night. Code Blue in Bay 2. The call echoed through the ER. "I have to go," Beatrice said, already turning away. "Take care of your employee, Mr. Thorn." Wesley watched her disappear into the controlled chaos of the ER, her curls bouncing as she ran. He stood there longer than necessary, until Oliver was discharged, until his driver arrived to take them both home. Later that night in his penthouse, Wesley sat at his desk with a glass of scotch. His laptop glowed with urgent emails, but he couldn't focus. Instead, he found himself writing on a legal pad. "Beatrice Whitman, Emergency Room, Bronx General." He stared at the words until they blurred, then tore off the page and crumpled it. What was he doing? Across the city, Beatrice sat on her fire escape, the sounds of the Bronx night rising around her. Her mother's voice drifted through the window. "Sherry, you're thinking too loud." Beatrice smiled despite herself. "Just getting some air, Manman." Gloria appeared at the window, her small frame wrapped in a worn robe. "The night air won't answer your questions, mon trésor." "I'm not questioning anything." "No?" Gloria's eyes twinkled. "Then why do you keep touching your shoulder where he brushed against you?" Beatrice dropped her hand, not having realized she was doing it. It's nothing. He's from a different world. Ah. Gloria settled onto the fire escape with a soft grunt. And who decides what world we belong to? God made one world, Sherry. People made the divisions. It's not that simple. Love never is. Gloria patted her daughter's knee, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Inside their apartment, the scanner Beatrice used to monitor emergency calls crackled to life. But for once, she didn't jump up immediately. Instead, she leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of cocoa butter and fresh bread. What if, Beatrice hesitated, what if some people are meant to be just moments, beautiful, impossible moments? Gloria was quiet for a long time, watching the city lights blink like earthbound stars. Finally, she spoke. La vie c'est pas un bout chemin. Life is not a short road, Beatrice translated automatically. And neither is love, mon cœur. Neither is love. In his office the next morning, Wesley found himself distracted during a crucial meeting about quarterly projections. Lana noticed, of course. She cornered him afterward. Okay, what's happening with you? She perched on his desk. And don't say nothing. You've checked your phone 15 times in the last hour. Wesley sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. I saw her again. Bus girl. Lana's eyes widened. Where? The emergency room. She's an ER nurse. He paused. Well, nursing intern. Of course she is. Lana studied him. You know, for someone who claims it was nothing, you seem pretty affected by this nothing. It's complicated. It's only complicated because you're making it complicated. Lana stood, smoothing her skirt. You know where she works. You're clearly interested. What's stopping you? Wesley turned to the window, looking out at the city that suddenly felt both larger and smaller than before. The last time I let someone in, Claire wouldn't want you to live like this, Lana said softly. She'd want you to be brave. The words hit him like a physical blow. In his mind, he could hear Claire's laugh, see her rolling her eyes at his hesitation. Take a chance, big brother. Life's too short for maybes. As if on cue, his phone buzzed with a news alert. Multi-vehicle accident on Cross Bronx Expressway, casualties being diverted to local hospitals. Wesley stared at the screen, his heart racing. Before he could think too hard about it, he was grabbing his coat. Where are you going? Lana called after him. The board meeting is in an hour. Reschedule it, he called back, already halfway to the elevator. Sometimes, he realized, you have to stop thinking about different worlds and impossible moments. Sometimes you just have to follow your heart into the chaos and hope it knows the way home. The elevator doors closed on Lana's knowing smile, and Wesley Thorne, CEO, perfectionist, control freak, did something completely unplanned. He headed toward the Bronx, toward uncertainty, toward her. The Bronx General Emergency Room was a storm of controlled chaos when Wesley arrived. Ambulances screamed into the bay one after another, bringing victims from the expressway pileup. He stood in the waiting area, his usual commanding presence diminished by the urgency surrounding him. Through the glass doors, he caught glimpses of Beatrice moving with precise efficiency. Her curls were tied back severely, and her scrubs bore scattered spots of blood. She looked nothing like the sleeping girl from the bus, yet somehow more real, more vital. Sir, unless you're injured, I need you to stay in the waiting area, a security guard instructed firmly. Wesley nodded, retreating to a plastic chair that had probably seen decades of anxiety and hope. His phone buzzed again. Lana, where are you? The board is furious. He typed back, handle it. Wesley Thorne delegating. Now I'm really worried. He put the phone away, focusing instead on the rhythmic chaos before him. Through the windows, he watched Beatrice work. Her movements were graceful, even in crisis, her voice carrying calm authority as she directed EMTs and comforted patients. Inside the ER, Beatrice felt his presence like a magnetic pull, but she couldn't spare a moment to think about it. A young woman with a head injury needed her attention. An elderly man was going into shock. A child with a broken arm wouldn't stop crying. Whitman, Dr. Patel called. Bay 3 needs an IV started. Hours passed in a blur of vital signs, medications, and quiet reassurances. Wesley remained in his chair, watching, waiting. He'd never been still this long in his life. Finally, as the crisis ebbed and the last accident victims were stabilized, Beatrice emerged from the ER. Her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, but her eyes were alert when they met his. Mr. Thorne, she approached cautiously. Are you hurt? No. He stood, suddenly unsure what to say. All his carefully crafted business vocabulary seemed useless here. Then why? she trailed off, noticing a coffee cup in his hand. "I thought you might need this." He offered the cup. "It's probably cold now." Beatrice stared at the cup, then at him, a smile tugging at her lips despite her exhaustion. "You sat here for 4 hours to give me cold coffee. It was hot when I bought it." A laugh escaped her, a real laugh, rich and warm. The sound did something to Wesley's carefully ordered world. "I know a place," she said suddenly. "They make better coffee than this, and it'll actually be hot, if you're interested." Wesley checked his phone. 17 missed calls, 32 texts, and 49 emails demanded his attention. "Lead the way," he said, slipping the phone back into his pocket. The diner was a small place 3 blocks from the hospital, wedged between a laundromat and a bodega. Christmas lights hung year-round in the windows, and the vinyl booths had patches covered with duct tape. It was nothing like the Michelin-starred restaurants Wesley frequented, but the moment they walked in, the waitress greeted Beatrice by name. "Your usual spot, honey?" The older woman, her name tag read Dorothy, asked, already grabbing menus. They settled into a booth by the window. Wesley looked comically out of place in his $1,000 suit, but something in his posture had relaxed. "I come here after most shifts," Beatrice explained, wrapping her hands around a steaming mug of coffee. "The coffee's terrible, but it's consistent. Like life," Wesley mused, "says the man who probably has a personal barista. Actually, I do." He smiled when she rolled her eyes. "But this is nice." Dorothy brought them plates of eggs and toast without being asked. Beatrice immediately offered half her bacon to Wesley, a gesture so casual and intimate it caught them both off guard. "Tell me," Wesley said, accepting the bacon, "why nursing?" Beatrice was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee. "My mother was a nurse, back in Haiti. She taught me that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about being present when people are at their most vulnerable." "Your mother sounds wise." "She is." Beatrice smiled. "She also thinks I work too hard and need to let love in." She made air quotes with her fingers, then blushed at her own words. Wesley's expression softened. "Mothers often see what we can't." "What about your mother?" "She died when I was young. It's just been me since my sister." He stopped, surprised by his own openness. Beatrice reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. The touch was brief, but electric. "I'm sorry." They sat in comfortable silence, the diner's ancient ceiling fan whirring above them. Outside, the city continued its endless dance of lights and shadows. "Why did you really come to the hospital today?" Beatrice finally asked. Wesley studied her face, the gentle curve of her cheeks, the warmth in her eyes, the tiny scar above her left eyebrow. "I saw the news about the accident. I thought I wanted to bring me cold coffee to see you," he admitted. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about that night on the bus." The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. It was just a moment. Was it? Before she could answer, her phone chirped. Her alarm for her mother's medication. Reality crashed back in. "I have to go," she said, gathering her things. "My mother needs her evening meds." Wesley nodded, already reaching for his wallet. Beatrice stopped him with a look. "I get a staff discount," she said firmly. "This one's on me." They stepped out into the evening air. The temperature dropped with the sun. Beatrice shivered slightly in her scrubs, and before she could protest, Wesley draped his suit jacket over her shoulders. "This probably costs more than my rent," she murmured, but didn't take it off. "Keep it." He smiled. "It looks better on you anyway." A bus rumbled past. Not the 84, but they both watched it anyway, remembering. "Beatrice," Wesley's voice was soft. "Would you have dinner with me? A real dinner?" She clutched his jacket closer, breathing in his scent, expensive cologne and something uniquely him. "Your world is very different from mine, Mr. Thorne." "Wesley," he corrected, "and maybe that's exactly why it makes sense." A siren wailed in the distance. Another emergency, another crisis. Beatrice looked up at him, this man who had waited 4 hours to give her cold coffee. "One dinner," she said finally, "but I choose the place." "Deal." He pulled out a business card and wrote his personal number on the back. "Text me when you're free." She took the card, their fingers brushing. "You should go. Your phone's been buzzing for the last hour." "Let it buzz." But he was already stepping back, watching as she slipped the card into her pocket. "Your jacket," she remembered, starting to take it off. "Keep it," he said again. "Consider it collateral. Now you have to see me again." She laughed, the sound carrying on the evening air. "Good night, Wesley." "Good night, Beatrice." They parted ways, her toward the subway, him toward the sleek car that had materialized at the curb. but something had shifted between them, like tectonic plates moving beneath the city streets. In her apartment, Gloria took one look at the expensive jacket and smiled knowingly. "L'amour ne se cache pas," she said softly. "Love cannot hide." In his penthouse, Wesley finally checked his messages. The board was in an uproar, deals were pending, chaos threatened his carefully built empire, but all he could think about was the way she'd looked in his jacket, and how sometimes the best things in life were the ones you never planned for. On his desk, Claire's last letter sat open. "The thing about control, big brother, is knowing when to let it go." For the first time since losing her, Wesley thought maybe he understood what she meant. 3 days passed before Beatrice finally sent the text. She'd written and deleted it a dozen times, his business card worn soft from being pulled in and out of her pocket. His jacket still hung in her closet, the expensive fabric out of place among her scrubs and hoodies. "Hi, it's Beatrice. Are you free tomorrow night?" His response came within minutes. "Yes. There's a place in the Bronx, Antonio's, 7 p.m. I'll be there." She smiled at his brevity, imagining him in his corner office, probably scheduling their dinner between million-dollar meetings. "That smile lights up the room, Sherry," Gloria observed from her recliner where she was folding laundry. "Is it him?" Beatrice tucked her phone away. "It's just dinner, Manman." Gloria's knowing smile spoke volumes. "That's why you've tried on 4 outfits?" "I haven't." Beatrice stopped, catching her reflection in the window. She was, in fact, surrounded by discarded clothing options. The next evening, Beatrice chose a simple burgundy dress that she'd worn to her nursing school graduation. It hugged her curves without being flashy, the color rich against her skin. She let her curls fall free, the way they'd been that first night on the bus. Antonio's was a family-owned Italian restaurant, the kind of place where the sauce recipes were generations old and the owner knew every regular by name. The walls were covered in vintage photographs of the Bronx, and the tablecloths were red and white checked cotton. Wesley arrived exactly on time, having swapped his usual suit for charcoal slacks and a cream sweater that probably cost more than Beatrice's monthly rent. He looked softer somehow, less corporate titan and more human. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You look," she gestured at his outfit, "different." "Good different?" "Just different." But her smile gave her away. Antonio himself showed them to a corner table, his eyes twinkling at Beatrice. "The usual piccola?" "Actually," Wesley interjected smoothly, "I'd love to try whatever she usually orders." Antonio beamed. "Ah, a man who trusts. Molto bene." Once they were settled with wine, a bottle Wesley insisted on despite the place being strictly BYOB, Beatrice relaxed enough to really look at him. Without his corporate armor, she could see the slight shadows under his eyes, the way one lock of hair refused to stay perfectly styled. "Rough day?" she asked. "The board wasn't thrilled about my impromptu hospital visit." He took a sip of wine. "Apparently, CEOs aren't supposed to disappear during quarterly reviews." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." His eyes met hers. It was worth it. The way he said it made her chest tight. Before she could respond, Antonio arrived with their appetizers, arancini that weren't on any menu, but that he made special for his favorites. "So," Wesley said, watching her break into the crispy rice ball, "tell me something I don't know about you." "Like what?" "Anything. Everything." He leaned forward slightly. "What makes Beatrice Whitman wake up in the morning?" She considered this, wiping sauce from her lip. "Promise not to laugh?" "Never. I collect old medical textbooks. The really ancient ones with bizarre treatments and hand-drawn illustrations. They remind me that medicine is always evolving, that what we think we know today might be completely wrong tomorrow." Instead of laughing, Wesley's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That's fascinating. Do you have a favorite?" "There's this one from 1832 that suggests treating fevers with applications of live snails." The conversation flowed easily after that. Wesley told her about his love of jazz records and how he learned to play piano but never performs for anyone. Beatrice shared stories about her mother's journey from Haiti, about growing up with proverbs in 3 languages. Their main courses arrived, Antonio's famous osso buco with saffron risotto. Wesley watched, amused, as Beatrice closed her eyes at the first bite. "Good?" "The best." She opened her eyes to find him staring. "What? You experience everything so fully." He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "It's refreshing." "You mean I'm not jaded like your usual dinner companions?" "I mean you're real." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Do you know how rare that is in my world?" The touch sent electricity through her arm. "Wesley, I know. He withdrew his hand. Different worlds. It's not just that. She set down her fork. Your world, it would eat me alive. The publicity, the expectations, the judgment. I'm just a nursing intern from the Bronx. You're not just anything. His voice was firm. And my world, it's not as scary as you think. As if on cue, a flash went off outside the restaurant window. Wesley's posture changed instantly, his shoulders tensing. Paparazzi, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. Beatrice felt her stomach drop. Do they follow you everywhere? Not usually, but there's been speculation about why I missed the board meeting. He pulled out his phone, grimacing at whatever he saw. We should go. Through the kitchen, she decided, standing. Antonio will understand. They slipped through the bustling kitchen, past steaming pots and startled line cooks. Antonio appeared, taking in the situation with practiced ease. La porta sul retro, piccola, he said, pointing to a back door. Be careful. In the alley behind the restaurant, Wesley pulled Beatrice close as another flash went off at the far end. Without thinking, she led him through a maze of side streets she'd known since childhood. They ended up in a small park, empty at this hour except for distant teenage laughter. Beatrice collapsed onto a swing, breathless from running in heels. After a moment, Wesley took the swing next to her. Well, she said finally, that was exciting. To her surprise, Wesley laughed, a real laugh that seemed to surprise even him. I haven't run from photographers since college. Is this what dating you would be like? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He turned to face her, his feet dragging in the wood chips. Is that what we're doing? Dating? I don't know. She looked up at the city-dimmed stars. Is it? Instead of answering, Wesley stood and moved behind her swing. His hands gripped the chains near her shoulders, and slowly, he began to push. Beatrice felt the night air rush past her face, carrying away the tension of their escape. Higher and higher she went, until she was laughing, until she felt like she could touch the stars. Yes, Wesley said suddenly. If you'll have me, that's exactly what we're doing. She dragged her feet, slowing the swing until she could turn and look up at him. He stood there, this powerful man who could buy and sell half of Manhattan, looking at her like she was something precious. Your board will hate it, she said softly. The newspapers will have a field day. CEO dates immigrant's daughter from the Bronx. Let them. He reached down, tucking a curl behind her ear. I'm tired of living in a world where everything is calculated and nothing is real. I can't promise I'll fit in. I don't want you to fit in. His hand lingered on her cheek. I want you to be you, the woman who falls asleep on strangers on buses, who saves lives and reads ancient medical books, who makes me feel more alive than I have in years. Beatrice stood, the swing bumping gently against her legs. They were close now, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Your sister, she said quietly. Tell me about her. Wesley stiffened slightly, but didn't pull away. Claire, she was light, pure light. She would have loved you. Why? Because you make me smile. His voice cracked slightly. I haven't really smiled since she died. Beatrice reached up, her fingers tracing his jaw. Wesley. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that made her shiver. I know it won't be easy. Our worlds, the press, the expectations. But I want to try. Do you? Instead of answering, Beatrice rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, questioning, full of possibility. Wesley's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss until the world fell away. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the teenage laughter had faded and the park was truly empty. The city hummed around them, a constant reminder of their different worlds trying to collide. Is that a yes? Wesley murmured against her hair. Beatrice laughed, the sound pure and clear in the night air. That's a God help us both. They walked back to where his driver waited, their fingers intertwined. Tomorrow would bring challenges, headlines, disapproval, the weight of their choices. But tonight, in a small park in the Bronx, two worlds had collided and refused to bounce apart. In her apartment, Gloria was still awake, pretending to read. She took one look at her daughter's flushed cheeks and bright eyes and smiled. L'amour danse sur les fils du destin, she said softly. Love dances on the threads of destiny. And somewhere in Manhattan, a CEO's phone buzzed with breaking news alerts about his dinner date. But for once, Wesley Thorne didn't care about controlling the narrative. He was too busy feeling alive. The morning headlines exploded like a bomb. Thorne Publishing CEO's mystery woman. Sources reveal romance with Bronx nurse. Wesley Thorne's secret dinner date. What we know. Publishing heir slums it in the Bronx. Board members concerned. Lana burst into Wesley's office, tablet in hand, her usually perfect ponytail slightly askew. "Why am I learning about your love life from page 6? Wesley didn't look up from his computer. "Because I was busy living it." "This isn't funny, Wes." She dropped into the chair across from him. "The board is in panic mode. Investors are calling. Your face is trending on Twitter." Now he did look up, a slight smile playing at his lips. And? Lana stared at him. "Who are you and what have you done with Wesley Thorne?" "I'm happy, Lana." He leaned back in his chair. "For the first time since Claire, I'm actually happy." Lana's expression softened. She'd known Wesley long enough to recognize the change in him, the lightness in his eyes, the absence of tension in his shoulders. "The press will dig," she warned. "They'll find everything about her. Her mother's immigration story, her financial struggles, her—" "Let them." Wesley's voice was firm. "Beatrice has nothing to hide. It's not about hiding. It's about privacy, protection." Lana sighed. "Does she know what she's getting into?" Before Wesley could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from Beatrice. "My patients are showing me tabloid photos. This is surreal." He smiled, typing back, "I'm sorry. Are you okay? Nurse Martinez is calling me Cinderella. But yes, I'm okay. Mom's loving it, though." At Bronx General, Beatrice was trying to maintain professional composure while her co-workers not so subtly shared gossip articles about her. "Girl, you didn't tell me he was that Wesley Thorne." Martinez cornered her in the supply closet. "Forbes 30 under 30? Named most eligible bachelor 3 years running? Can we focus on restocking gauze?" Beatrice tried to hide her blush. "Honey, you're dating a billionaire. Gauze can wait." "I'm not—" Beatrice stopped, realizing she wasn't sure what to call what they were doing. One magical dinner and a kiss in the park didn't exactly define a relationship. Her phone buzzed again. "Wesley, dinner tonight?" "My place. No photographers." She stared at the message, her heart racing. Going to his home felt like crossing another boundary, making this more real. "That smile says it all." Martinez squeezed her arm. "Just be careful, okay? Men like that." "He's different," Beatrice said softly. "They're all different until they're not." The rest of her shift passed in a blur of knowing looks and whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. Even Dr. Patel seemed to be watching her more closely. By evening, Beatrice stood in front of her closet, panic rising. "Man, I can't go to his penthouse. What was I thinking?" Gloria looked up from where she was sorting medications into her weekly pill organizer. "You were thinking with your heart, Sherry. That's not always bad. But look at these headlines." Beatrice thrust her phone at her mother. "From public transit to private jets, Wesley Thorne's new romance." "They're making me sound like some kind of strong woman who caught the eye of a man who sees her worth," Gloria suggested mildly. "You forget, Montresor, I was once the immigrant nurse who people thought wasn't good enough." Beatrice sat heavily on her bed. "Dad was a doctor, Manman, not a CEO. And both are just titles." Gloria stood, moving to her daughter's closet. She pulled out a simple black dress. "Wear this. Be yourself. The rest is noise." An hour later, Beatrice stood in the private elevator of one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings, Wesley's security code taking her straight to the penthouse. The doors opened directly into his home, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering city below. Modern art pieces worth more than her student loans adorned the walls. But what caught her attention was the baby grand piano in the corner, sheet music scattered across it. "Hi." Wesley's voice came from behind her. He'd shed his suit jacket and tie, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "Hi." She turned, suddenly shy. "Nice place." "It's just a place." He moved closer, and she caught the scent of something cooking. "Are you hungry?" "You cook?" "I'm full of surprises." He led her to the kitchen, where pots simmered on a professional-grade stove. "Claire taught me. She said every man should know how to make at least one meal well." Beatrice hopped onto a bar stool, watching him move confidently around the kitchen. "What's on the menu?" "Coq au vin." He glanced at her. "Your mother mentioned it was your favorite." "You talked to my mother?" "She called me." Wesley stirred something that smelled divine. Said if I was going to turn her daughter's life upside down, I should at least know how to cook her comfort food. The thought of Gloria calling Wesley made Beatrice's chest tight with emotion. "And you learned just like that?" "I had my chef teach me." He smiled at her expression. "I told you, full of surprises." They settled into easy conversation as he cooked, Beatrice sharing stories from her shift, Wesley telling her about Lana's morning dramatics. It felt normal, almost domestic until his phone buzzed with another news alert. "Don't," Beatrice said when he reached for it. "Not tonight." Wesley looked at her for a long moment, then deliberately turned his phone face down. "Not tonight," he agreed. After dinner, which was surprisingly excellent, Wesley led her to the piano. "Will you let me play for you? I thought you never played for anyone." "I'm breaking all my rules lately." He sat at the bench, patting the space beside him. Beatrice settled next to him, their thighs touching. Wesley's fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before beginning to play. The melody was haunting and beautiful. "Claire de Lune." "Claire's favorite," he said softly, still playing. "She used to lie under the piano while I practiced." Beatrice watched his hands move, saw the emotion play across his face. Without thinking, she leaned her head against his shoulder, just like that first night on the bus. The music surrounded them, and for a while the world outside was, with its headlines and judgments and social boundaries, ceased to exist. They were just two people, finding comfort in each other's presence. When the last note faded, Wesley turned to her. "Stay." Beatrice's breath caught. "Wesley, not like that." He cupped her face gently. "Just stay. Watch the city lights. Let me hold you. We can face the world tomorrow." She should say no. The headlines would be explosive. The gossip would be merciless. Instead, she kissed him. Later, they lay on his absurdly comfortable couch, Beatrice wrapped in one of his cashmere throws, her head on his chest. The city sparkled below them like a field of earthbound stars. "What are we doing?" she whispered. Wesley's fingers traced patterns on her arm. "Living. Finally. Really living. The board can't dictate my heart. The press doesn't get a vote." She propped herself up to look at him. "You're not worried about what people think?" "No." He brushed a curl from her face. "About losing you because of their opinions?" Terrified. The honesty in his voice made her heart ache. "I'm not going anywhere. Promise?" Instead of answering, she settled back against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Outside, camera flashes occasionally lit up the night, paparazzi trying to get a glimpse of the publishing heir and his new love. But inside, wrapped in warmth and silence, two people from different worlds discovered that sometimes the best stories are the ones you never saw coming. In the Bronx, Gloria sat in her recliner, smiling at a text from Wesley's private number. "She's safe, she's happy. Thank you for the recipe." "Bondi fait woot lee," she murmured. God makes his own path. And in a penthouse high above Manhattan, Wesley Thorne held the woman who had fallen asleep on his shoulder on a city bus, and knew with absolute certainty that some risks were worth taking, some rules worth breaking, and some loves worth fighting for. 2 weeks into their relationship, the first real storm hit. Beatrice was changing into her scrubs when Martinez burst into the locker room, tablet in hand. "You need to see this," she said, her usual playful tone gone. The article's headline made Beatrice's blood run cold. Exclusive. Wesley Thorne's new romance. A calculated move. Sources reveal truth behind publishing. Heirs rags to riches love story. The piece was brutal, suggesting their relationship was a publicity stunt to humanize Wesley before a major corporate merger. It cited anonymous sources close to Thorne Publishing, claiming Wesley had a history of strategic relationships. "It's trash," Martinez said firmly, but Beatrice barely heard her. Her phone buzzed. Wesley calling. She let it go to voicemail. Across town, Wesley stood in his office, staring at the article on his screen. Lana paced behind him. "I'll find the leak," she promised, "and I'll destroy them." "That's not—" Wesley started, then tried Beatrice's number again. Straight to voicemail. "What do you want me to do?" Lana asked softly. Wesley loosened his tie, feeling like he couldn't breathe. "Find out who talked to them, and get me everything on this reporter." "Wes, everything, Lana." She studied him for a moment. "Okay, but first go to her. This isn't something you fix with corporate tactics." The Bronx General ER was unusually quiet when Wesley arrived. He spotted Beatrice at the nurse's station, her back rigid as she updated charts. "B," he said softly. She didn't turn around. "I'm working. Please. 5 minutes." "Why?" Now she did turn, and the hurt in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. "To explain how I'm part of your image rehabilitation." "You know that's not true." "Do I?" She glanced around, aware of the eyes watching them, "because apparently everyone in your world thinks—" "Dr. Patel needs you in Bay 2, a nurse interrupted, giving Wesley a cold look. Beatrice straightened her scrubs. "I have to go." "B, please." "Don't call me that." She walked away, leaving him standing there under the harsh fluorescent lights. Wesley's driver was waiting outside, but he waved him off. Instead, he walked, letting the cold November air clear his head. Without conscious decision, his feet carried him to Antonio's. The restaurant was closed for the afternoon lull, but Antonio himself was out front, arranging wine bottles. "Ah, il principe," the old man said, not unkindly. "Come to fix what's broken?" Wesley stopped. "How did you—" "News travels fast in the neighborhood." Antonio gestured to a chair. "Sit. Talk." "I don't know how to fix this," Wesley admitted, sinking into the chair. "Because you're thinking like a businessman." Antonio poured 2 glasses of wine. "Love isn't a merger, figlio mio. You can't control every variable. The article is garbage." Antonio waved his hand dismissively. "But your Bella doesn't need you to wage war on reporters. She needs to know she's not a strategy." Wesley stared into his wine glass. "How?" "Dio mio, these young people." Antonio shook his head. "You show her. With time, with trust, with truth. The heart knows what spreadsheets cannot show." Across town, Beatrice's shift ended. She changed slowly, dreading checking her phone. 27 missed calls. Wesley, reporters, unknown numbers, and 1 text from her mother. "Come home, mon trésor. Some storms are better weathered together." The apartment was warm when she arrived, filled with the scent of Gloria's jumu soup, the traditional Haitian pumpkin soup she made whenever Beatrice was hurting. "He's been calling here too," Gloria said without preamble, ladling soup into a bowl. Beatrice collapsed onto their worn couch. "What am I doing, Manman? Playing princess in a world that's going to eat me alive? Is that what you think you're doing?" Gloria sat beside her daughter. "Or is that what you're afraid others think? You didn't see their faces at the hospital, like I'm some gold digger who saves lives every day, who worked through college, who never let anyone tell her she wasn't enough." Gloria's voice was fierce. "That's who you are, Beatrice, with or without a wealthy man's love. But what if the article's right? What if I'm just convenient?" Gloria was quiet for a moment, stirring her soup. "Your father was convenient too, you know." Beatrice looked up, surprised. Her mother rarely spoke of her father. The hospital administrator's son dating an immigrant nurse. Gloria smiled sadly. Everyone had opinions. But love, real love, it doesn't care about convenience. "How did you handle it?" "I remembered who I was, and I watched his actions, not other people's words." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Gloria's smile turned knowing. Beatrice opened the door to find Wesley, looking less polished than she'd ever seen him. His hair was windblown, his tie gone, and he was holding a bag from Antonio's. "I brought dinner," he said simply, "and truth." Gloria discreetly disappeared into her bedroom as Beatrice let him in. "I've never been good at this," Wesley started, setting the food down. "Relationships, feelings. After Claire died, I built walls so high, even I couldn't see over them." Beatrice stayed silent, watching him. "The merger they mentioned. It's real, but you—" He moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You're the most real thing in my life, and I'm terrified of losing you because my world is too loud, too harsh, too different from mine, too fake." He finally reached for her hand. "You're the only genuine thing in it." Beatrice let him take her hand, but didn't move closer. "The source in the article. Lana's investigating. But I don't care about—" "I do care," her voice was firm, "because this is my life too now. My patients seeing these stories, my co-workers whispering, my mother getting calls from reporters." Wesley's face fell. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted—" "I know," she squeezed his hand, "but we need to be smarter, more careful, or braver," he countered. "Let me take you to the charity gala next week. Show everyone exactly who you are. Brilliant, compassionate, real. Wesley, no hiding, no shame, just us facing my world together." He pulled her closer. "Unless you want out?" The vulnerability in his voice made her heart ache. She looked up at him, this powerful man who'd walked through the Bronx to bring her dinner, who learned to cook her favorite food, who was offering to face his world with her instead of hiding her from it. "Your board will hate it," she whispered. "Let them. The press will be brutal. We'll be stronger." She studied his face, seeing not the billionaire CEO but the man who let her sleep on his shoulder on a city bus. Okay. Take me to your gala." She managed a small smile. "But I'm wearing what I choose." Wesley's answering smile was radiant. He pulled her into his arms, breathing in the hospital antiseptic and coconut scent that had become his favorite perfume. From her bedroom doorway, Gloria watched them with knowing eyes. "L'amour vrai ne cache pas sa lumière," she murmured. "True love doesn't hide its light. Later, after Wesley left and the Antonio's takeout was just empty containers, Beatrice found a small box he'd slipped into her bag. Inside was a simple silver necklace with a musical note pendant. The note read, "For the woman who made my heart play music again." She touched the pendant, thinking of him at his piano, of Claire's favorite song, of all the walls they'd have to climb. Her phone buzzed with another reporter's call. She declined it, then texted Wesley. Together? His response was immediate, always. The storm wasn't over. In fact, it was probably just beginning. But sometimes, Beatrice thought, the most beautiful things grow in rain-soaked earth. In his car, heading back to Manhattan, Wesley made one call. "Lana, about the gala. Change of plans. I'm bringing a date, and I want everyone to know exactly who she is." The game was changing. The rules were being rewritten. And two hearts from different worlds were choosing to beat as one, no matter what storms lay ahead. The Plaza Hotel glittered like a jewel box, its grand ballroom transformed for New York's elite annual winter gala. Beatrice stood in the entrance, her heart thundering against her ribs. She'd chosen a deep blue velvet gown that hugged her curves before flowing elegantly to the floor. Her curls were styled in an intricate updo, with a few strategic tendrils framing her face. "Ready?" Wesley squeezed her hand. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, but his eyes hadn't left her since he'd picked her up. "No," she admitted. "But yes." They could hear the whispers as they entered. Hundreds of eyes turned to watch New York's most talked-about couple make their debut. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. "Ignore them," Wesley murmured, his hand warm on the small of her back. "Just breathe." Lana materialized beside them, resplendent in silver. "You look stunning," she told Beatrice sincerely. "Both of you, the photographers are going crazy." "Wonderful," Beatrice muttered. "Own it," Lana advised. "You belong here as much as anyone." Before Beatrice could respond, an elegant older woman approached. Her silver hair was swept into an immaculate chignon, and her diamonds could have paid off Beatrice's student loans. "Wesley, darling." Her voice was pure Upper East Side refinement. "Won't you introduce us?" "Mrs. Caldwell." Wesley's grip on Beatrice tightened slightly. "This is Beatrice Whitman. B. Catherine Caldwell is the head of our board of directors." "Charmed." Mrs. Caldwell's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We've all been so interested in Wesley's new friend." "Partner," Wesley corrected firmly. "Beatrice is my partner." Mrs. Caldwell's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Of course. Tell me, Miss Whitman, how are you finding our world? Quite different from—" "Where was it? The Bronx?" Beatrice felt Wesley tense beside her, but she kept her voice steady. "Different, yes, but medicine has taught me that people are fundamentally the same everywhere. We all bleed red, Mrs. Caldwell." There was a moment of startled silence before Lana smoothly intervened, steering Mrs. Caldwell away with practiced ease. "That was perfect," Wesley whispered, pride evident in his voice. "I'm shaking," Beatrice admitted. "Come dance with me." He led her to the dance floor just as the orchestra began a waltz. Years of forced dance lessons paid off as Wesley guided her smoothly through the steps. "Everyone's staring," she murmured. "Let them." He pulled her closer. "You're the most beautiful woman here. You're biased. Completely." His smile was soft, private. "Thank you for coming tonight. Even though I just antagonized your board chairman? Especially because of that." He spun her gently. "You didn't back down. You didn't pretend to be something you're not." They moved together in perfect rhythm, and for a moment Beatrice forgot about the watching eyes and whispered judgments. There was only Wesley's hand in hers, his heartbeat against her palm, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. The spell broke when someone tapped Wesley's shoulder. "Mind if I cut in?" The man was tall, classically handsome, with the kind of smile that belonged in toothpaste commercials. Wesley's expression cooled noticeably. "Robert," his voice was clipped. "I didn't know you were back from London. Just flew in." Robert's eyes fixed on Beatrice. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your lovely date?" Wesley's jaw tightened, but social training won out. "Beatrice, this is Robert Blackwood, former VP of our European division." "Former." Beatrice felt the tension crackling between the men. Such an ugly word. Robert's smile turned predatory. "I prefer to think of it as a strategic retreat." "After you tried to orchestrate a hostile takeover," Wesley added coldly. "Ancient history." Robert held out his hand to Beatrice. "May I have this dance?" Before Wesley could object, Beatrice squeezed his arm. "One dance," she said quietly. "I can handle this." Reluctantly, Wesley stepped back. Robert swept Beatrice into a technically perfect waltz, but his touch made her skin crawl. "So," he said smoothly, "you're the nurse everyone's talking about. And you're the failed corporate raider." Robert's smile tightened. "Feisty. I can see why Wesley's amused by you." "Amused? Oh, come now." His voice dropped lower. "You don't really think this is serious? Wesley Thorne doesn't do serious, not since his sister's tragic accident." Beatrice tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "You don't know him." "I know him better than you think." Robert's eyes glittered. "I know about the merger talks, the board's concerns, the PR nightmare of his alternative lifestyle choices. Let go of me. I wonder." His mouth curved cruelly. "Did you know you were hired?" Beatrice's blood ran cold. "What? The night you met on the bus? Not an accident. Wesley's team had been monitoring your route for weeks. The perfect setup, the exhausted nurse, the chance encounter. Very romantic. You're lying. Ask him about Operation Cinderella." Robert spun her sharply. "Ask him why he really missed that board meeting. Check the dates." The music ended. Beatrice yanked herself free from Robert's grip, her mind spinning. Wesley appeared instantly at her side. "Are you okay?" he asked, glaring at Robert. "I need some air." Beatrice turned and fled toward the terrace doors. The night air was bitter cold, but she barely felt it. Her hands gripped the stone balustrade as she tried to steady her breathing. "B." Wesley's voice was soft behind her. "What did he say to you?" "Operation Cinderella." She turned to face him. "Was any of it real?" Wesley's face went absolutely still. "Where did you hear that name?" "Oh, God!" Beatrice felt sick. "It's true?" "No, I mean, yes. There was an operation, but it wasn't—" "How long?" Her voice cracked. "How long were you watching me before that night?" "B, please." "How long?" Wesley ran a hand through his hair, destroying its perfect style. 3 weeks. But it wasn't what you think." "What I think?" Beatrice laughed bitterly. "What I think is that I'm an idiot. The perfect publicity stunt, the poor nurse from the Bronx, humanizing the cold CEO right before a major merger. That's not the missed board meeting." Realization dawned horribly. "You knew about the accident on the expressway before it happened, didn't you? It wasn't spontaneous. Nothing was spontaneous. The operation was real," Wesley admitted, stepping closer. "But what happened between us? That was real too. Is real. How can I believe you?" Tears burned in her eyes. Was anything not planned? The dinner at Antonio's, the piano, the necklace? She reached up and yanked off the musical note pendant he'd given her. It glinted in the moonlight before falling to the stone terrace with a tiny clink. "Beatrice, please." Wesley's voice broke. "I love you." "No." She backed away. "You love the idea of me, the story of me, the perfect PR narrative." Inside, the orchestra started another waltz. The music floated out to the terrace, a cruel reminder of their dance just minutes ago. "Let me explain," Wesley pleaded. "The whole story—" "I have to go." Beatrice turned toward the doors. "At least let me drive you." "No." She straightened her spine, channeling every ounce of dignity she possessed. "I took the bus once. I can do it again." She walked back through the ballroom with her head high, ignoring the whispers and stares. Lana tried to stop her at the door, but Beatrice pushed past. Outside, the December air bit at her exposed skin. She'd left her wrap inside, but she couldn't go back, wouldn't go back. Her phone buzzed. Wesley calling. She turned it off. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. Beatrice walked through the Manhattan night in her velvet gown and elegant updo, tears freezing on her cheeks. Back at the plaza, Wesley stood on the terrace, the silver necklace clutched in his fist. Behind him, Robert Blackwood's laughter drifted out from the ballroom. Lana found him there 10 minutes later. "She's gone?" she asked softly. Wesley nodded, not trusting his voice. "The operation was my idea," Lana admitted. "But falling in love with her? That was all you. She'll never believe that now." "Then make her believe it." Lana touched his arm. "Fight for her, Wes. Not with corporate strategies or grand gestures. Fight for her with the truth." But the truth, Wesley was beginning to realize, was a double-edged sword. And he'd just cut the heart of the woman he loved. In the Bronx, Gloria opened her door to find her daughter in tears, her beautiful gown wrinkled, her makeup streaked. "Oh, mon cœur." She pulled Beatrice inside. "What happened?" "You were right," Beatrice whispered. "Some stories are too good to be true." But as Gloria held her daughter, she noticed something. Even through her tears, Beatrice's hand kept rising to her throat, searching for a necklace that was no longer there. Sometimes, Gloria knew, the heart remembers what the mind tries to forget, and sometimes the truest love stories are the ones that break before they can be fully written. The question was, could this one be pieced back together? 3 days after the gala, the headlines were merciless. Thorne's Cinderella story crashes. Sources reveal orchestrated romance. Nurse flees Plaza Gala. Trouble in Paradise. Operation Cinderella. Inside Wesley Thorne's calculated love story. Beatrice worked her shifts with mechanical precision, ignoring the pitying looks from her co-workers. She'd turned off her phone, unable to face the hundreds of messages from Wesley, Lana, and now reporters who'd somehow gotten her number. "You can't hide forever," Martinez said gently, finding her in the supply closet during break. "Have you even listened to his explanations?" "There's nothing to explain." Beatrice reorganized gauze packets that didn't need organizing. "It was all a lie. Girl, I've seen how he looks at you. That's not something you can fake." Before Beatrice could respond, Dr. Patel appeared in the doorway. "Whitman, you're needed in Bay 6, multiple trauma coming in." The emergency turned out to be a 5-car pileup. For hours, Beatrice lost herself in the work, grateful for the distraction of broken bones and bleeding wounds. These were problems she knew how to fix. Across town, Wesley sat in his darkened office, staring at the necklace in his hand. The musical note pendant caught the faint light, a reminder of everything he'd lost. Enough. Lana's voice cut through his brooding. She strode in and yanked open his blinds. "This stops now. Leave me alone." "No." She planted herself in front of his desk. "You're Wesley Thorne. You built an empire from a failing publishing house. You survived losing Claire. You don't get to give up now." "She won't answer my calls." "Then stop calling." Lana's voice softened. "And start showing her the truth." Wesley looked up. "How?" "First, we deal with Robert." Lana's eyes glinted dangerously. "I found proof he was behind the leak to the press. He's been planning this since he heard about the merger." "I don't care about—" "But Beatrice will." Lana cut him off. "She needs to know this wasn't just some PR stunt, that there are people actively trying to destroy what you have." Wesley stood, energy finally returning to his movements. "Get me everything." "Already done." Lana handed him a file. "But Wesley, this isn't just about proving Robert wrong. You need to prove yourself right." In the Bronx, Gloria watched her daughter move through their apartment like a ghost. Beatrice had thrown herself into extra shifts, coming home only to shower and change before returning to the hospital. "Cherie," Gloria called softly, catching Beatrice as she rushed past. "Sit with me. I'm late for—" "You're running." Gloria patted the couch beside her. "From him, from yourself, from the truth." Beatrice sank down, suddenly exhausted. "What truth?" "That love, real love, is messy. It doesn't arrive in perfect packages." Gloria took her daughter's hand. "Your father and our beginning was complicated too. He didn't orchestrate meeting you." "No?" Gloria smiled mysteriously. "He transferred to my hospital specifically to meet the Haitian nurse everyone talked about. Planned it for months." Beatrice stared at her mother. "What?" "Sometimes people take complicated paths to simple truths." Gloria squeezed her hand. "The question isn't how the journey began. It's whether the destination was worth it." Before Beatrice could respond, someone knocked on their door. Gloria's smile widened. "That would be for you." Beatrice opened the door to find Antonio, holding a familiar paper bag. "Piccola," he said warmly. "We need to talk." He settled at their small kitchen table, unpacking containers of his famous osso buco. The familiar scent filled the apartment, bringing unwanted memories of her first real date with Wesley. "He didn't send me," Antonio said, reading her expression. "In fact, he asked me not to come." "Then why—" "Because I was there." Antonio pushed a plate toward her. "The night he came to my restaurant after your fight about the article. The night he showed me who he really is." Beatrice picked at her food. "A master manipulator. A man in love." Antonio's voice was firm. "A man who walked for hours in the cold, not to plan strategies but to understand his own heart. He had me watched for weeks before. See, and I had my Paolo followed to school every day when he was young." Antonio shrugged. "Fear makes us do strange things, Piccola. The question is, what do we do after the fear?" As if on cue, Beatrice's work phone, the only one she kept on, buzzed with a text from Martinez, 911, Dr. Patel coding, "Get here now." She ran to the hospital, her conversation with Antonio still echoing in her mind. The emergency room was chaos when she arrived. "What happened?" she asked Martinez. "Allergic reaction. He was treating a patient and—" Martinez stopped, her eyes widening at something behind Beatrice. Dr. Patel was being wheeled out on a stretcher, pale but stable, and behind him, in scrubs and a white coat, was Wesley. "What are you—" Beatrice started. "I've been volunteering here," he said quietly. 3 nights a week, learning, understanding your world." "How long?" Since the article, since you told me I needed to understand what these headlines mean for your life. He stepped closer. I was here during the expressway pileup, not as a CEO, but as a volunteer watching you save lives. Beatrice felt her carefully constructed walls trembling. Why? Because you were right. Our worlds are different, so I decided to learn yours. His voice cracked slightly. Operation Cinderella was real. Lana planned it, thinking a romantic story would help with the merger. But B falling in love with you. That was the most real thing I've ever done. He pulled out a familiar silver chain. I had this engraved. Read it. Through blurring eyes, Beatrice read the tiny script on the back of the musical note. Some songs begin with silence. The night on the bus, Wesley continued. I was running away from another failed date Lana had arranged. I wasn't supposed to be there. You weren't supposed to fall asleep on me, but you did, and in that silence I heard my heart start beating again. Wesley, I know I can't erase what happened. He held out a file. But I can show you the truth. About Robert, about the operation, about everything, no more secrets. Martinez appeared with 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee. Take your break, Whitman. Some things are more important than restocking supplies. They ended up in the empty hospital chapel, its quiet peace a stark contrast to their turbulent emotions. Beatrice read through the file, emails proving Robert's sabotage, the original operation plans, Wesley's volunteer application from weeks ago. You really scrubbed bedpans? She asked, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. Among other glamorous tasks. He touched her hand tentatively. I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking you to remember what's real. And what's that? That I love you. His voice was raw with honesty. That I'd rather lose everything else than lose you. That every morning I wake up thinking about your laugh, and every night I fall asleep missing your head on my shoulder. Beatrice looked at him, really looked. Past the CEO facade, past the scandal, past the headlines. She saw the man who learned to cook her favorite meal, who played Claire's song in the dark, who humbled himself to understand her world. If we do this, she said slowly, no more operations, no more strategies. Just us, he promised. Messy and real and completely unplanned. She touched the engraved pendant. Some songs begin with silence, and some love stories begin with bus rides. Wesley smiled cautiously, even if someone planned the route. Before she could respond, both their phones buzzed. Breaking news alerts. Robert Blackwood had been arrested for corporate espionage. The merger was safe. The scandal was shifting, but neither of them checked their phones. Instead, in a quiet hospital chapel, surrounded by the echoes of prayers and hopes, they began writing a new chapter, one that started not with headlines or operations, but with a simple truth. Sometimes the most carefully planned beginnings lead to beautifully unplanned loves. Outside, Gloria and Antonio sat in the hospital cafeteria, sharing coffee and knowing looks. L'amour trouve toujours son chemin, Gloria murmured. L'amore trova sempre la strada, Antonio agreed. Love always finds its way, in any language, in any world, against any odds. And somewhere in the city, a bus 84 continued its route, carrying new stories, new possibilities, new beginnings. Because sometimes the best endings are just new ways to start. 1 year later, the Bronx General Hospital's annual charity gala looked nothing like the glittering Plaza Hotel affair. Instead of crystal chandeliers, there were simple string lights. Instead of orchestral music, a local jazz band played. And instead of society's elite in designer gowns, there were doctors, nurses, and community members in a cheerful mix of formal wear and medical scrubs. Beatrice stood at the podium, her burgundy dress catching the warm light. Thank you all for coming tonight. As the new head of our community outreach program, I'm proud to announce that Thorn Publishing's matching grant has helped us exceed our fundraising goal for the pediatric wing. Applause filled the hospital's transformed cafeteria. In the back, Wesley leaned against the wall, watching his wife command the room. The simple gold band on his left hand caught the light as he applauded. Their wedding, 6 months ago, had been at Antonio's restaurant. No society photographers, no corporate politics, just family, true friends, and enough Italian food to feed half the Bronx. Gloria had cried through her blessing, and Antonio had insisted on making the wedding cake himself. You're doing that thing again, Lana said, appearing beside Wesley with 2 glasses of champagne. What thing? Looking at her like she's the answer to every question you've ever had. Lana handed him a glass. It's disgustingly romantic. Wesley smiled, not taking his eyes off Beatrice. She is, you know, the answer. Who would have thought? Lana mused. Operation Cinderella turned into a real-life love story. Speaking of operations, Wesley turned to his friend. How's the date with the handsome doctor from pediatrics? Lana blushed. Actually blushed. Dr. Rivera is surprisingly non-terrible. High praise. Shut up. But she was smiling. You started a trend, you know. CEOs volunteering at hospitals, dating medical staff. Good. Wesley straightened as Beatrice concluded her speech. The worlds needed mixing up. Beatrice made her way through the crowd toward them, stopping to hug Martinez, who was showing off ultrasound photos of her twins. Dr. Patel, now chief of emergency medicine, gave her a proud pat on the shoulder as she passed. Mrs. Thorne, Wesley greeted formally when she reached them. Mr. Thorne, her eyes danced. Still slumming it in the Bronx? Actually, he pulled her close, I was thinking of buying property here. A certain CEO needs to be closer to his volunteer work. Beatrice's eyes widened. You're not moving the company headquarters? Already in progress. He kissed her forehead. Turns out the Bronx has everything we need. The board agreed. The board learned that some things are non-negotiable. Wesley's voice softened. Like being close to the people we love. Lana excused herself as Dr. Rivera approached, leaving the couple in their own world. Dance with me. Wesley held out his hand. Here, in the cafeteria. Why not? We've had better luck in unexpected places. The jazz band was playing a slow melody. Wesley led Beatrice to the makeshift dance floor, holding her close as they swayed. I have news, she murmured against his chest. Good news? Depends. She looked up at him, eyes shining. How do you feel about mixing our worlds even more permanently? Wesley's steps faltered. B. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. Due in spring. For a moment, Wesley couldn't speak. Then he lifted her off her feet, spinning her as she laughed. Mon Dieu! Gloria's voice carried across the room. What did I say about careful dancing? She hurried over, Martinez and Antonio right behind her. Somehow, in the past year, they'd all become an unlikely family. Man, Beatrice started, but Gloria was already touching her daughter's face with knowing hands. Un bébé, she said softly. I knew it. A grandmother knows these things. Antonio was already opening champagne. For everyone except La Mama, he insisted, and Martinez was talking about pediatric recommendations. Wesley held Beatrice from behind, his hands protectively over her stomach. Happy, he whispered. Terrified, she admitted. But the good kind, like falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder. Like falling in love with a CEO who learned to change bedpans. They laughed together, remembering all the twists and turns that had led them here. The bus ride that started it all. The carefully planned operation that turned into real love. The scandals and secrets and revelations that had tested their hearts. Later that night, they took Bus 84 home, something they did every anniversary of their first meeting. The same route, the same seats, but this time with wedding rings and a future growing between them. Tell me again, Beatrice said sleepily, her head finding its familiar place on Wesley's shoulder. What part? About the night everything changed. Wesley smiled, playing with her fingers as the city passed by their window. Well, there was this beautiful nurse who fell asleep on my shoulder, and a lonely CEO who let her, she added. And somehow, between one bus stop and the next, two different worlds collided, and stayed collided, Beatrice finished. Back in their brownstone, their compromise between his penthouse and her apartment, Wesley played Claire's favorite song on the piano, while Beatrice read medical journals on the couch. Gloria's voice drifted up from her ground-floor apartment, where she was probably telling Antonio about baby names over tea. Life wasn't perfect. There were still society whispers, still cultural gaps to bridge, still moments when their different backgrounds created friction. But they'd learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about choice, choosing each other every day across all divides. The musical note necklace still hung around Beatrice's neck, its engraving worn smooth from years of touching. Some songs begin with silence, and some love stories begin on city buses, twist through operations and revelations, and end up exactly where they were meant to be. Wesley's hands stilled on the piano keys. B? Thank you for falling asleep on me, she smiled, one hand on her stomach where their futures merged. Thank you for being worth waking up for. Outside, Bus 84 continued its endless route through the city, carrying new stories, new possibilities, new chances for worlds to collide. Because sometimes the most beautiful symphonies start with a single unexpected note. And in the quiet of their home, as the city hummed its eternal lullaby, two hearts that began as strangers on a bus beat in perfect harmony, a melody all their own, unplanned, unexpected, and absolutely real. The end 5 years later. The sound of tiny feet running across hardwood floors echoed through the brownstone, followed by musical giggles and a patient mother's voice. Claire Gloria Thorne, no running in the house. 4-year-old Claire, with her mother's curls and her father's steel blue eyes, skidded to a stop. "Désolé, maman," she called, mixing her grandmother's French with childish enthusiasm. Beatrice smiled, adjusting the baby carrier where 6-month-old Alexander slept against her chest. Like his sister, he was a perfect blend of both worlds, his father's strong features softened by his mother's warm complexion. The Thorne Publishing headquarters, now a gleaming tower in the South Bronx, had transformed the neighborhood. But unlike typical corporate expansions, this one had grown with the community. The ground floor housed a state-of-the-art medical clinic where Beatrice split her time between pediatric care and running her healthcare advocacy foundation. Wesley's office overlooked both the Manhattan skyline and the Bronx streets where his heart had found its home. Photos lined his walls: their wedding at Antonio's, Claire's first birthday with Gloria teaching her to dance, the day Alexander was born, and in the center, framed in silver, a simple bus pass. "Il Principe and his family are late," Antonio called up from his new restaurant location on the building's terrace level. The original place still operated in the old neighborhood, but this rooftop venue had become a favorite for both corporate lunches and family dinners. "Someone couldn't decide which tutu to wear," Wesley explained, descending the stairs with Claire perched on his shoulders. She wore a pink tutu over her dress, a tiara askew in her curls. "Ah, La Principessa must have choices." Antonio winked at the little girl who had the entire building wrapped around her finger. Gloria emerged from her private dining room, a permanent reservation, courtesy of Antonio's insistence. "There are my petits trésors." She reached for Alexander, who woke with a toothless smile for his grandmother. Lana arrived with Dr. Rivera and their 1-year-old daughter, Luna, who immediately reached for Claire. The two girls had been inseparable since Luna's birth. "The new pediatric wing numbers are amazing," Lana reported, seamlessly mixing business and family as they all settled around the long table. "The community engagement program is setting records." "Speaking of records," Martinez added, arriving with her twins, "guess who just got approved for medical school?" Cheers erupted around the table. Little Claire, not quite understanding but loving celebration, threw her tiny hands up. "Yay, Auntie M!" Wesley watched his family, both blood and chosen, with quiet joy. Under the table, his hand found Beatrice's, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. "Penny for your thoughts, Mr. Thorne," she whispered. "Just thinking about Bus 84, he replied, "and how sometimes the best destinations aren't on any map." Beatrice squeezed his hand. "We should take the kids on it someday. Tell them the story." "Which part?" "All of it. The operation that backfired beautifully. The nurse who fell asleep. The CEO who learned to listen to his heart instead of his board. And the love that rewrote all the rules," Wesley added. Claire tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, play the special song." The rooftop restaurant had a piano, of course it did. Wesley settled at the keys, Claire snuggled against his side. As Claire de Lune filled the evening air, Beatrice watched her husband teaching their daughter the notes, just as his sister had once taught him. Alexander cooed from Gloria's arms, and Luna danced with Martinez's twins. Lana and Dr. Rivera swayed together, while Antonio poured wine and shared wisdom. The Manhattan skyline glittered to their east, the Bronx stretched warmly to their west, and here, in the space between worlds, a family had bloomed. The musical note necklace still hung around Beatrice's neck, now accompanied by tiny handprints from small fingers always reaching for the shiny pendant. Some songs begin with silence, but they grow into symphonies played by many hands, sung by many hearts. As the last notes of Claire de Lune faded into the twilight, Wesley looked at his wife, still beautiful, still real, still the best unplanned moment of his life. Their eyes met across the room, sharing the secret smile of two people who knew that sometimes the biggest dreams come true on the humblest of city buses. And somewhere in the growing darkness, Bus 84 continued its faithful route, carrying new stories, new possibilities, and maybe, just maybe, another chance for worlds to collide and hearts to find their unexpected homes. Because love, like music, knows no boundaries. It simply plays on generation after generation, writing new songs for tomorrow. Based on this emotional story of love, overcoming and the coming together of different worlds, here is an impactful question. If you had to choose between following society's expectations or listening to your heart, which path would you choose? Wesley risked everything, his reputation, his company, and his controlled world, for a true love that began on a simple bus. Have you ever lived or witnessed a moment when love required courage to break down social barriers? What would you do if you were in Beatrice's shoes when you found out that their meeting was planned? Would you forgive as she did when she saw the true intentions behind the actions, or would you keep the walls up? Your participation in the channel is very important. The golden highlights in her elegant braids caught the fluorescent light of the Brewhaven coffee shop as she wiped down the same counter for the third time that morning. Her dark brown eyes, usually bright with sarcasm, looked tired today. "Another double shot Americano," she called out, forcing energy into her voice that she didn't feel. The customer, a woman in yoga pants scrolling through Instagram, barely looked up as she grabbed her drink. Melissa watched her walk away, probably heading to some perfect suburban life that existed only in social media posts. The bell above the door chimed, and Melissa's shoulders automatically straightened. Keep smiling, keep working, keep surviving. That's what Dr. Martinez had told her during their last session. The sertralina from Walgreens was supposed to help with the fog in her head, but some mornings still felt like swimming through concrete. She opened her Dailyo app quickly, tapping the OK mood emoji. Not great, not terrible, just okay. That seemed to be her default setting these days. The morning rush had been brutal. Her manager, Derek, kept shooting her looks every time she moved a little slower than usual. Her Converse sneakers were already killing her feet, and it wasn't even noon. The medical bills sitting in her small Wicker Park apartment felt like they were calling her name, each one a reminder of everything she'd lost. Stop thinking about it, she told herself, the same mantra she'd been using for months. A text from her friend Janae popped up. "Girl, saw your ex at Whole Foods with some new chick. You dodging my calls again?" Melissa swiped the message away without responding. She wasn't ready for Janae's well-meaning pep talks about getting back out there, and healing takes time. Some wounds were too fresh for motivational quotes. The steam wand hissed as she prepared another latte, her silver bracelet, the one her mother had given her before she passed, catching on her uniform sleeve. She adjusted it carefully. It was one of the few beautiful things she had left. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was deeper than the usual customer chatter, with an edge of desperation that made Melissa look up. A tall man stood at the counter, and what struck her first wasn't his perfectly styled brown hair or his expensive Banana Republic shirt. It was the way he held the baby. The infant was crying. Not the gentle fussing she'd heard from other customers, children, but the kind of desperate wailing that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. The man's blue-gray eyes looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "I'm sorry," he said, shifting the baby awkwardly. "I know this is unusual, but I really need help. His name is Anthony Gabriel, and this is my son, Brian." His voice cracked slightly on the word son. "I've tried everything. Formula, different bottles, the expensive Dr. Brown's ones everyone recommends. Nothing works." Melissa found herself walking around the counter before she realized what she was doing. The baby's cries seemed to echo in her chest, awakening something she'd been trying to bury for months. "How old is he?" she asked softly, her hands instinctively reaching toward the child. 6 months, Anthony replied, his relief visible as she gently took Brian. "His mother, she died during childbirth. I've been raising him alone, and I'm failing." The moment Brian settled against Melissa's chest, something shifted. His cries softened to whimpers, then to silence. Her body remembered what her mind was trying to forget. The weight of a baby, the trust, the need. Anthony stared at her with wonder. "How did you—" Melissa felt tears threatening to fall as she looked down at Brian's blue-gray eyes, so much like his father's. She knew she should hand him back, should return to her coffee counter and her safe, numb routine. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "I think I can help you." But what she didn't tell him was that helping him might destroy the careful walls she'd built around her broken heart. 3 days later, Melissa stood outside a glass tower in downtown Chicago, questioning every decision that had led her to this moment. The address Anthony had texted her on WhatsApp seemed impossible, the kind of building where people in $1,000 suits disappeared into elevators that probably cost more than her annual salary. She adjusted her gold hoop earrings nervously, smoothing down her best H&M blouse. Her reflection in the building's windows showed a woman trying too hard to look like she belonged. "Apartment 4207. Just tell security you're here for Brian Gabriel," his message had read, followed by a simple, "Thank you." Those 2 words had kept her awake for 3 nights straight. The security guard, a middle-aged black man with kind eyes, smiled when she mentioned Brian's name. "Oh, you must be the lady Mr. Gabriel's been waiting for. That baby's been keeping the whole floor up," he chuckled, handing her a visitor's badge. "Elevator bank C, all the way up." As the elevator climbed, Melissa's phone buzzed with notifications she'd been ignoring. Janae had sent 17 messages since yesterday, ranging from concerned to annoyed. Her boss Derek had called twice about shift coverage. 3 different collection agencies had left voicemails that she'd deleted without listening to. But Brian's face kept floating in her mind, those blue-grey eyes that had looked at her with complete trust, the way his tiny fingers had wrapped around hers. Her body had responded to his need in a way that terrified and comforted her simultaneously. The elevator opened to a hallway that smelled like expensive candles and success. Apartment 4207 had double doors, actual double doors, like in the movies. Before she could knock, one door swung open. Anthony stood there in a wrinkled Patagonia sweatshirt, his usually perfect hair sticking up at odd angles. Dark circles under his eyes made him look older than his 34 years. "Melissa," he breathed, relief flooding his voice. "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind." Behind him, she could hear Brian crying, that same desperate wail from the coffee shop. The sound went straight through her like electricity. "So I almost did," she admitted, stepping inside. The apartment was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her car, but it felt cold, unlived in, like a magazine spread rather than a home. Anthony ran his hands through his disheveled hair. "I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time since you left the shop. I've tried everything, different formulas, those expensive organic ones from Whole Foods, even called 3 different pediatricians. Nothing works." Brian's cries grew louder from what she assumed was the nursery. Without thinking, Melissa walked toward the sound, her practical nature taking over. "Show me his routine," she said. The nursery was perfect, like everything else in Anthony's world appeared to be. Soft greys and whites, a crib that probably cost more than most people's rent, shelves lined with organic everything. But Brian lay in his Carter's onesie, red-faced and inconsolable, his tiny fists waving in frustration. Melissa felt her chest tighten with familiar recognition. "When did he last eat?" "An hour ago, maybe 2. Anthony's voice cracked with exhaustion. "Time kind of blurs together when you're not sleeping." She picked up Brian gently, feeling that same immediate settling she'd experienced at the coffee shop. His cries softened to whimpers as she held him against her chest, swaying slightly. "He's not hungry," she said softly. "He's scared." Anthony stared at her. "Scared. Babies can sense when the people caring for them are stressed," Melissa explained, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're running on empty. He can feel that energy. It's making him anxious." The room fell quiet except for Brian's gradually calming breaths. Anthony sank into the expensive nursing chair, covering his face with his hands. "I'm failing him," he whispered. "Elena would have known what to do. She had all these books, took every class. I was supposed to be the provider. She was supposed to be—" His voice broke. Melissa felt something crack open in her chest, not the careful numbness she'd cultivated, but something warmer and more dangerous. "You're not failing him," she said quietly. "You're just learning." Anthony looked up at her, his blue-grey eyes so similar to his son's. "Will you help us? I know it's unusual, and I can pay whatever you need. My company just secured another round of funding, and How much?" The practical question slipped out before she could stop it. "Whatever you're making at the coffee shop, I'll triple it." Melissa's mind raced. Triple her salary would cover her medical bills, her rent, maybe even let her breathe for the first time in months. But holding Brian felt like walking through a minefield of memories she wasn't ready to face. Her phone buzzed with another notification, probably another overdue bill. She looked down at Brian, now peaceful in her arms, his tiny hand gripping her finger with surprising strength. "I need to know something first," she said, meeting Anthony's desperate gaze. What happened to his mother really happened. The silence that followed told her she wasn't prepared for the truth she was about to hear. Anthony's hands trembled as he reached for the framed photo on Brian's dresser, and Melissa realized she wasn't ready for what he was about to reveal. "Elena was perfect," Anthony began, his voice barely above a whisper. The photo showed a beautiful Latina woman with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. We met at Northwestern. She was finishing her master's in education. I was drowning in my startup. She used to joke that I lived on energy drinks and impossible dreams. Melissa shifted Brian gently in her arms, feeling the weight of the story she was about to hear. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline stretched endlessly, but the apartment felt smaller somehow, filled with grief that hadn't been spoken aloud. The pregnancy was perfect, too, Anthony continued, setting the photo down with careful precision. Every appointment, every ultrasound. She did yoga, ate organic everything from that expensive place on North Avenue, read to him every night. His Apple Watch buzzed with a Slack notification, but he ignored it completely. She had this playlist on Spotify, classical music mixed with Spanish lullabies her grandmother used to sing. Brian made a soft sound against Melissa's chest, and she found herself swaying automatically, her silver bracelet catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Oh, what happened?" she asked gently, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Anthony walked to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the glass. Labor started normally. We went to Northwestern Memorial, the best hospital in the city. She was excited, texting her sister updates, posting on Instagram about finally meeting our little miracle. His voice cracked on the last words. Melissa felt her own chest tighten, memories threatening to surface that she'd worked so hard to bury. She focused on Brian's breathing, steady and trusting against her. 22 hours of labor, Anthony continued. Everything seemed fine until it wasn't. Placental abruption. The doctors moved so fast, I barely understood what was happening. 1 minute Elena was squeezing my hand, laughing about how Brian was taking his time like his father. The next minute, alarms were going off and they were rushing her to surgery. The apartment felt heavy with silence, except for the distant hum of Chicago traffic below. "They saved Brian," Anthony said, turning from the window. His blue-gray eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But Elena, she hemorrhaged. They couldn't stop the bleeding. I held her hand as she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Melissa closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten. She knew that kind of loss. Different circumstances, but the same hollow ache that followed you everywhere. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The worst part was coming home," Anthony continued, his voice stronger now, like he needed to get it all out. "The nursery was ready. The fridge was full of casseroles from Elena's friends, and I had this perfect baby who needed me to be perfect too. But I couldn't even figure out how to work the bottle warmer she'd registered for at Target." Brian stirred in Melissa's arms, making soft baby sounds that seemed to fill the space between their pain. She looked down at his peaceful face. Elena's son, Anthony's miracle, a child born from love and loss in equal measure. "Elena's family blames me," Anthony said quietly. "Her mother won't return my calls. Her sister blocked me on Instagram after I posted a photo of Brian on his 3-month birthday. They think I should have done more, should have insisted on a C-section earlier, should have been a better advocate." "And you blame yourself too," Melissa said. "It wasn't a question." Anthony nodded, sinking into the expensive nursing chair that probably Eleanor had picked out, dreaming of rocking her son to sleep. "Every day, I keep thinking about all the things I should have done differently. Maybe if I hadn't been checking my phone during contractions, maybe if I'd pushed the doctors harder when she said something felt wrong." Melissa understood that kind of guilt, the endless loop of what-ifs and if-onlys that could consume you if you let them. Her own loss had come with its own catalogue of self-blame. "Is that why you avoid social media?" she asked. "Just can't handle seeing other people's perfect families," Anthony admitted. "Elena used to love Instagram. She had this account where she posted about teaching and pregnancy. Her last post was a picture of the hospital bag, captioned, 'Ready to meet our little man.' It got 300 likes and dozens of comments about how excited everyone was." Brian chose that moment to open his eyes, looking up at Melissa with that serious expression babies get when they're taking in the world. She felt something shift inside her chest, not the careful numbness she'd maintained, but something warmer and more frightening. "He has her eyes," she said softly. "So everyone says that," Anthony replied, "but sometimes I look at him and I see her smile, or the way she used to scrunch her nose when she was thinking." Melissa's phone buzzed with another text from Janae. "Girl, where are you? Derek's been calling about your shifts." Reality crashed back in. Her life outside these expensive walls, the bills waiting in her apartment, the job she couldn't afford to lose. "Anthony," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "if I do this, if I help you with Brian, I need you to understand something about me too." Melissa's words hung in the air like a confession she'd never planned to make, and Anthony could see the pain she'd been hiding behind her sarcastic smile. Brian had fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling with perfect trust. Melissa looked down at him, her dark brown eyes reflecting something Anthony hadn't seen before. Not just compassion, but recognition, the kind that comes from walking through your own version of hell. "I lost a baby too," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the hum of the city below. 7 months ago. Anthony felt his breath catch. The way she'd held Brian so naturally, the immediate calm that seemed to radiate from her when she touched him, it all made terrible, beautiful sense now. "His name was Marcus," Melissa continued, her gold hoop earrings catching the light as she shook her head slightly. "He was born at 28 weeks, premature rupture of membranes, they called it. Medical terminology for your body failed when it mattered most." She shifted Brian gently, and Anthony noticed how her silver bracelet, her mother's bracelet she'd mentioned, seemed to give her strength as she touched it. "He lived for 6 days, she whispered. 6 days in the NICU at University of Chicago Medical Center. Tubes and wires everywhere, machines beeping constantly. I couldn't hold him properly because of all the equipment, but I could touch his tiny hand through the incubator." Anthony sank deeper into the nursing chair, Elena's chair, feeling the weight of shared grief settling between them. He understood now why Melissa had seemed to recognize something in Brian's cries, in his need. "My husband couldn't handle it," Melissa continued, her voice growing stronger, like telling the story was pulling something out of her that needed to be released. "Marcus dying, the medical bills, me falling apart. He filed for divorce while I was still getting bills from the funeral home. Said he needed space to process and couldn't handle my depression." "Jesus," Anthony breathed. "The medical bills destroyed my credit," she said, a bitter laugh escaping. "So even with insurance, the NICU stay cost more than most people make in 2 years. That's why I'm working at the coffee shop, why I take extra shifts, why my phone is constantly buzzing with collection calls I can't answer." Brian stirred slightly in her arms, and she automatically began that gentle swaying motion that seemed to come from muscle memory. "After Marcus died, my body," she paused, searching for the right words. "It didn't understand that he was gone. I was still producing milk for a baby who would never need it. The doctors gave me medication to stop it, but sometimes when I hold Brian, it's like my body remembers what it was made to do." Anthony felt tears threatening. "Melissa, I had no idea. When I asked you to help, I didn't know." "That's why I can help him," she interrupted gently. "Brian needs what my body is still trying to give. And maybe," she looked down at the sleeping baby, "maybe I need him too." The apartment felt different now, less like a showcase and more like a sanctuary where 2 broken people had found each other through an impossible circumstance. "Is that why you stopped going to church?" Anthony asked, remembering how she'd mentioned her faith at the coffee shop. Melissa nodded. "Pastor Williams kept talking about God's plan, about how everything happens for a reason. I wanted to scream at him that there was no good reason for Marcus to die, no lesson worth learning from watching your child suffer." She paused. "But sometimes, when I hold Brian, I hear the hymns in my head. Amazing grace, how great thou art. The songs my grandmother used to sing when I was scared." Anthony's phone buzzed with notifications he continued to ignore, his team at the startup probably wondering why he'd missed 3 meetings today. But sitting here, watching Melissa hold his son with such tender understanding, he realized he'd been approaching everything wrong. "I've been trying to be perfect," he said quietly, "for Brian, for Elena's memory. I thought if I could just figure out the right formula, the right schedule, the right everything, I could somehow make up for the fact that he doesn't have his mother." "Babies don't need perfect," Melissa said, adjusting Brian's position with practiced ease. "They need present. They need someone who shows up even when it's hard, even when you're scared you're doing it wrong." Her phone buzzed again. Derek from the coffee shop, probably wondering where she was. The real world existed outside Anthony's expensive windows, with its bills and obligations and people who didn't understand that sometimes healing requires taking risks that look insane from the outside. "If I do this," Melissa said, meeting Anthony's eyes, "I need some rules. I keep my apartment, my independence. This is about helping Brian, not about me becoming some live-in nanny from a romance novel." Anthony nodded quickly. "Of course. Whatever you need. And I need you to understand that some days will be harder than others. Grief isn't linear, and neither is healing." "I understand," he said, though he wasn't sure he completely did. Brian chose that moment to wake up, his blue-grey eyes opening slowly, focusing on Melissa's face with that serious baby expression. He made a soft sound, not crying, just acknowledging her presence. "Hey there, little man," she whispered, and Anthony watched his son's face transform into something that might have been a smile. "I think," Melissa said softly, "we're all going to learn something from each other." But what none of them knew was that learning to trust again would test them in ways they never imagined. 2 weeks later, Melissa discovered that some routines save you, and others slowly break down the walls you've built around your heart. The alarm on her cracked iPhone 8 buzzed at 6:30 a.m., but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling of her small Wicker Park apartment. Her Google Calendar showed today's schedule: Brian 8 a.m., 12 p.m., Brewhaven 2 p.m., 8 p.m. The new routine was exhausting, but for the first time in months, her Dialio app showed more green, good days than grey okay ones. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through the WhatsApp messages from Anthony that had come in during the night. A photo of Brian at 3 a.m. with the caption, "Couldn't sleep, but look at this face." Another at 5:15 a.m. "He's asking for you, I think." And finally, "Thank you for yesterday, see you at 8. Those messages had become her favorite part of waking up, though she'd never admit it. Melissa pulled on her favorite jeans and a soft sweater from Target, checking her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her braids looked good. She'd gotten them redone at Janet's cousin's salon in Bronzeville last weekend, the blonde tips freshly touched up. Her gold hoops caught the morning light filtering through her small window. The 20-minute bus ride to Anthony's building had become a meditation of sorts. She'd put in her earbuds and listened to gospel music, Tasha Cobbs, Kirk Franklin, sometimes her grandmother's old Mahalia Jackson recordings. The music filled the spaces in her chest that had been empty for so long. "Morning, Miss Clark," the security guard, Robert, called out as she entered the lobby. "How's our little man doing?" "Growing like a weed," she replied, genuinely smiling. It still surprised her how easily the smiles came now. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor used to make her nervous. Now it felt like coming home to something she hadn't known she was missing. Anthony opened the door before she could knock, his hair still messy from sleep, wearing a Northwestern University t-shirt and pajama pants. The casual version of him had become her favorite, less polished, more real. "He's been fussy since 5 a.m., Anthony said, stepping aside to let her in. "I tried everything, the swing, the white noise machine, even that playlist Elena made. Nothing worked." Melissa could hear Brian's cries from the nursery, but they didn't sound distressed anymore. They sounded like calls for her specifically. Her body responded before her mind could catch up, that familiar tightening in her chest that meant her milk was ready. "Good morning, sweet boy," she murmured, lifting Brian from his crib. He was wearing a Carter's onesie with little dinosaurs. Anthony's choice, she could tell. Elena probably would have picked something more sophisticated. The moment Brian felt her arms around him, his cries softened to whimpers, then to the contented sounds that meant he felt safe. Melissa settled into the nursing chair, the expensive one that had become hers by default, and began to feed him. Anthony lingered in the doorway, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "He loves you," he said quietly. "I love him too," she replied, surprised by how easily the words came. 3 months ago, she couldn't imagine loving anything again. Now this little boy had somehow crept past all her defenses. "Coffee?" Anthony asked, the question that had become their morning ritual. "Please." 2 sugars. Splash of oat milk. She heard him moving around the kitchen, the sound of the expensive espresso machine he'd bought but never learned to use properly. These small domestic moments had become precious to her. Proof that she could still be part of something, still be needed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janae. "Girl, you've been glowing lately. What's his name?" Melissa smiled, typing back, "His name is Brian. He's 6 months old and he's teaching me how to be happy again." Janae's response was immediate. "Boy, you know what I mean, but I'm glad you're smiling. Bring him by the shop sometime." Anthony returned with 2 mugs, hers in a ceramic cup from some tech conference, his in a Northwestern mug that had seen better days. He'd learned to make her coffee exactly how she liked it, which felt more intimate than it should have. "I have to ask you something," he said, settling into the other chair in the nursery. "My company is hosting a small gathering next Friday. Nothing fancy, just dinner with some investors. But I was wondering if you and Brian might come with me." Melissa looked up from Brian, surprised, like a date. "Like Anthony ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as nervous energy. Like I don't want to spend another evening making small talk about market projections when I could be home with the two people who matter most to me. The words hung in the air between them, heavier than the morning light streaming through the nursery windows. Melissa felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with Brian's feeding schedule. Anthony, she said carefully, we agreed this was about helping Brian. I'm not looking for anything complicated. I know, he said quickly. I know we did, but Melissa, these past 2 weeks, I haven't felt this alive since before Elena died, and I hope, that maybe you feel something too. Brian had finished eating and was now looking between them with that serious baby expression, as if he understood the weight of the conversation happening above his head. Melissa shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently while she gathered her thoughts. I feel something, she admitted quietly, but I'm scared. My last relationship ended with divorce papers and a broken heart. I don't know if I'm ready to risk that again. Anthony leaned forward, his blue-gray eyes earnest. I'm not asking you to risk anything. I'm asking you to consider that maybe we're both healing, and maybe we're healing together for a reason. Before Melissa could answer, Brian made a sound that seemed to say everything she couldn't find words for, and she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to believe in something beautiful again. Friday night arrived faster than Melissa's courage could catch up, and she found herself standing in front of her closet mirror, questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. The black dress from H&M hung perfectly on her curves, the one she'd bought 2 years ago for a work Christmas party she'd ended up skipping. Her braids were pulled back into an elegant low bun, the blonde tips creating a subtle halo effect. She'd borrowed Janet's good jewelry, delicate gold earrings and a matching necklace that made her feel like someone who belonged in Anthony's world. Her phone buzzed with a text from Anthony. Car's downstairs whenever you're ready. Brian's being an angel in his tiny suit. She smiled despite her nerves. Anthony had insisted on getting Brian a miniature navy blazer from Baby Gap, claiming his son needed to look investor-ready. The image of 6-month-old Brian in formal wear had been melting her heart all week. Another message popped up, this one from Janet. Girl, send pics. And remember, you deserve good things. Melissa stared at her reflection one more time. The woman looking back at her seemed different from the one who'd been surviving on sarcasm and sertralina just a month ago. This woman looked hopeful. It was terrifying. The ride to the restaurant in Anthony's Tesla Model Y felt like floating. Brian sat in his car seat between them, babbling happily and grabbing at everything within reach. He'd grown so much in their weeks together, more alert, more responsive, more trusting. When he looked at her now, his blue-gray eyes lit up with recognition that made her chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to belonging. Nervous? Anthony asked, his hand briefly touching hers as he adjusted the car's climate control. Terrified, she admitted. I've never been to a business dinner. What if I say something wrong? What if they ask about my job at the coffee shop and realize I don't belong here? Anthony pulled into the valet area of Alinea, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. The building looked like something from a magazine, all glass and steel and impossibly elegant people walking through its doors. Melissa, Anthony said, turning to face her fully, you're brilliant. You're raising my son like he's your own, and you make me laugh every single day. If they can't see how incredible you are, that's their problem, not yours. The valet opened her door before she could respond, and suddenly she was stepping onto Michigan Avenue in borrowed jewelry and her best dress, holding a baby who trusted her completely, while the man she was falling for introduced her to his world. The private dining room was intimidating. 12 people in suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent, talking about market disruption and sustainable energy solutions. Anthony's hand found the small of her back as he guided her around the room, introducing her simply as Melissa, who's been helping with Brian. She noticed he didn't say babysitter or nanny, just Melissa, like she mattered. Brian was a hit, charming everyone with his serious expressions and occasional baby babble. One of the investors, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, spent 20 minutes talking to Melissa about child development, while Brian sat contentedly in her lap. He's lucky to have you, the woman said. You can tell he feels secure. That doesn't happen by accident. Melissa felt something warm bloom in her chest. For so long, she'd defined herself by her failures. The baby she couldn't save, the marriage she couldn't hold together, the bills she couldn't pay. But here, holding Brian while intelligent people discussed changing the world, she felt capable again. The dinner conversation flowed between renewable energy patents and funding rounds, topics that should have made her feel out of place. Instead, she found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about Anthony's work that she'd never thought to ask before. "So your company designs solar panels for urban environments?" she asked during dessert. "Solar collection systems integrated into building materials," Anthony explained, his eyes lighting up the way they did when he talked about something he loved. "The idea is to make every surface energy productive without changing the aesthetic of the building, like the windows could generate power." "Exactly," he smiled at her in a way that made her stomach flutter. "Eleanor used to say I talked about it too much, but you actually seem interested." The comment slipped out without thought, and Melissa saw Anthony's face change slightly. Not sadness, exactly, but recognition of how different this was from what he'd had before. After dinner, they walked along the lakefront, Brian sleeping peacefully in his stroller. The Chicago skyline glittered across the water, and Melissa felt like she was living someone else's life, the kind of life she'd seen in movies, but never imagined for herself. "Thank you," Anthony said as they sat on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan. Tonight felt normal, like we were a family going to dinner together. "We're not a family," Melissa said automatically, the words sharper than she'd intended. Anthony was quiet for a moment, watching the waves lap against the shore. "What are we then?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility and fear in equal measure. Melissa looked down at Brian, sleeping so peacefully in his tiny blazer, his little fist curled around her finger even in sleep. "I don't know," she admitted. "I know I love him. I know being with both of you makes me feel like myself again, the version of myself I was before everything fell apart. And I know," Anthony said quietly, "that when I picture Brian's future, you're in it. When I think about coming home from work, I imagine both of you there. When I think about bedtime stories and first steps and birthday parties, I can't imagine them without you." Melissa felt tears threatening, the good kind that come when something broken starts to heal. "Anthony, I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know that whatever this is between us, it's real for me. You're not just helping with Brian, you're helping me remember what it feels like to hope for something." Brian stirred in his stroller, making soft baby sounds without waking up. The sound made them both smile, this tiny person who had brought them together in the most unexpected way. "I need to tell you something," Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm starting to hope for something too. And that scares me more than anything." But what scared her even more was the realization that she might already be too deep to turn back now. 3 weeks after the dinner, Melissa thought she had everything under control, until one exhausting Tuesday morning, when everything she'd carefully balanced came crashing down. The day started wrong from the moment her alarm failed to go off. Her iPhone 8's battery had died overnight, and she woke up at 7:45 a.m. to Derek from Brew Haven pounding on her apartment door. "Melissa, you were supposed to open this morning." His voice carried through the thin walls of her Wicker Park building. "We've got a line of customers and no one to work the espresso machine." She stumbled to the door in her pajamas, her braids messy from sleep. "Derek, I'm so sorry. My phone died, and I have to be at Anthony's in 15 minutes. Brian has his pediatrician appointment." "I don't care about your babysitting gig," Derek snapped, his face red with frustration. "You work for me, remember? The coffee shop that actually pays your salary." Melissa felt her chest tighten with familiar anxiety. She'd been juggling both jobs for weeks, but lately her heart had been more invested in Brian's schedule than her shifts at Brew Haven. The realization hit her like cold water. She was in danger of losing the job that kept her independent. "Give me 5 minutes," she said, already reaching for her clothes. "I'll call Anthony and explain." But when she tried calling Anthony's number, it went straight to voicemail. He was probably already in his morning meeting with potential investors from California, the big presentation he'd been preparing for all week. She fired off a quick WhatsApp message. "Emergency at work. Running 2 hours late. So sorry. Brian's appointment is at 11. Can you handle it?" The response came back immediately. "Mel, I can't. This meeting determines our next funding round. I need you." Her hands shook as she pulled on her Converse and grabbed her keys. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, being caught between two worlds, failing at both. The morning at Brew Haven was brutal. Derek made pointed comments about reliability and commitment, while she worked through the breakfast rush with a fake smile. Her regular customers noticed her distraction, and she spilled a latte on Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for her usual decaf with extra foam. "I'm so sorry," Melissa said, grabbing paper towels while Mrs. Patterson shook coffee off her coat. "Honey, you seem stressed," the older woman said kindly. "Everything all right?" Melissa felt tears threatening, just trying to keep all the pieces together. By 10:30 a.m., she was finally free to leave for Anthony's apartment. She caught the first bus to downtown, checking her phone obsessively. 3 missed calls from Anthony, 2 voicemails she didn't have time to listen to, and a series of increasingly frantic WhatsApp messages. "Mel, where are you? Brian's been crying for an hour. I tried the bottle, but he won't take it. The investors moved the meeting to 1 p.m. Please tell me you're close. I don't know what to do. He needs you." The last message made her heart break a little. Anthony, who could negotiate million-dollar deals and revolutionize sustainable energy, was helpless when it came to his own son's basic needs. She arrived at his building at 11:15 a.m., her hair escaping from its ponytail, her Brewhaven uniform stained with coffee and stress sweat. Robert, the security guard, took one look at her and fast-tracked her to the elevator. "Rough morning, Miss Clark?" "You could say that," she replied, trying to catch her breath. She could hear Brian crying before Anthony even opened the door. When he did, she saw a man at the end of his rope, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his blue-gray eyes. "Thank God," he breathed, stepping aside to let her in. I was starting to panic. The pediatrician's office called twice asking if we were still coming. Brian was in his bouncy seat in the living room, his face red from crying, his little fists waving in frustration. The moment he saw Melissa, his cries changed pitch, less distressed, more demanding, like he was scolding her for being late. "I know, baby," she murmured, scooping him up. "Mama's here now." The word slipped out before she could stop it. "Mama, not Melissa's here or I'm here. Mama." Anthony heard it too. She could tell by the way he went very still, watching her settle Brian against her chest. "Oh, Mel," he said quietly. "Did you just—" "I didn't mean to say that," she said quickly, feeling heat creep up her neck. "It just slipped out. I know I'm not his mother." But even as she said it, Brian was already calming in her arms, making those contented sounds that meant he felt safe. Her body responded automatically, that familiar tightening that meant she was ready to feed him, to comfort him, to be everything he needed. "So maybe we should cancel the appointment," Anthony said, checking his watch. "Reschedule for when we're both less stressed." "No," Melissa said firmly. "Brian needs his checkup. I can take him." "By yourself?" The question hung in the air between them. Taking Brian to the pediatrician alone felt like crossing a line they hadn't discussed. It felt like being his parent, not just his caregiver. "I've been to every appointment with him for the past month," she pointed out. "I know his feeding schedule, his sleep patterns, when he last had a diaper change. I probably know his routine better than you do right now." Anthony looked like he wanted to argue, but his phone buzzed with another call from his office. "The investors just landed at O'Hare," he said, checking the screen. "If I don't nail this presentation—" "Go," Melissa said. "Brian and I will handle the appointment. I'll text you updates." She could see the internal struggle on Anthony's face, the need to be present for his son versus the pressure to save his company. Finally, he grabbed his suit jacket from the back of the couch. "His insurance card is in the diaper bag," he said, moving into business mode. "The pediatrician is Dr. Sarah Chen at Northwestern Memorial. If anything seems wrong, anything at all, you call me immediately." "Anthony," Melissa said, shifting Brian to one arm so she could touch his shoulder. "I've got this. Trust me." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd become so integral to his life that he couldn't imagine navigating parenthood without her. "I do trust you," he said finally, "more than anyone." An hour later, sitting in Dr. Chen's office while Brian charmed the nurses with his serious expressions and occasional smiles, Melissa realized something had shifted. When the doctor asked about Brian's home life, she found herself answering naturally. "He's sleeping through the night now, eating well, very social. His dad is a wonderful father, very attentive." "And you're—" Dr. Chen asked, making notes on her tablet. Melissa hesitated for just a moment. "I'm his— I help take care of him." But in her heart, she knew she was more than that. She was the person Brian looked for when he woke up. She was the one who knew he preferred to be burped on the left shoulder, that he liked to have his feet tickled during diaper changes, that he calmed down fastest when she hummed old gospel songs. Walking out of the doctor's office with a perfectly healthy Brian in her arms, Melissa realized she had stopped thinking about when this arrangement would end and started thinking about what it would mean if it never did. That evening, Melissa discovered that some conversations change everything, and some truths are too big to take back once they're spoken. She was sitting on the floor of Anthony's living room, Brian propped up against her legs, when Anthony finally came home from his investor meeting. The Chicago skyline twinkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and she'd been humming Amazing Grace, while Brian played with a soft toy from Target. "How did it go?" she asked, looking up as Anthony loosened his tie. His face was unreadable, but she'd learned to recognize the subtle signs of his moods over the past weeks. "We got the funding," he said, but his voice lacked the excitement she'd expected. $2.5 million for the next phase. "Anthony, that's incredible." Melissa lifted Brian up, making him giggle. "Did you hear that, little man? Your daddy is changing the world." But Anthony wasn't smiling. He sat down heavily on the couch, running his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture she'd come to know so well. "How was the appointment?" he asked. "Perfect. Brian's growing beautifully, hitting all his milestones. Dr. Chen said he's in the 90th percentile for height." She settled Brian in his bouncy seat, where he could see both of them. "She also said he's clearly bonded with his primary caregiver." "You," Anthony said quietly. "Me," Melissa confirmed, feeling heat creep up her neck again. "Anthony, about what I said earlier, calling myself his mama," he finished. "You called yourself his mama?" The word hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they were ready to cross. Brian babbled happily, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening above his head. "I shouldn't have," Melissa said carefully. "I know Elena is his mother, even if she's not here. I never want to replace her or—" "Stop," Anthony said, his voice sharper than she'd heard it before. He stood up, pacing to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the city lights. "Just stop." Melissa felt her heart sink. She'd overstepped, gotten too comfortable, forgotten her place in this carefully constructed arrangement. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Anthony turned around, and she was surprised to see tears in his blue-grey eyes. "You're sorry? Mel, do you have any idea what you've given us?" "What you've given me?" She stared at him, confused by the emotion in his voice. "I spent 6 months failing at being Brian's father," he continued, his words coming faster now. 6 months of him crying every time I tried to hold him, of feeling like Elena's death was my fault and now I was failing her son too. I was using the Calm app 3 times a day just to function, and I still couldn't sleep because I was terrified something would happen to him on my watch." Brian made a soft sound, and Melissa automatically reached down to adjust his position, the gesture so natural it was unconscious. "And then you walked into my life," Anthony said, watching her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "Not just to help with Brian, but to show me what being a parent actually looks like. You don't just feed him and change him and put him to sleep. You know that he likes his left foot tickled more than his right. You know he calms down faster when you hum gospel songs. You know he's getting sleepy when he rubs his ear. Those are just details," Melissa said softly. "Those details are love," Anthony replied, "and Brian knows it. I've watched him light up when he hears your voice in the hallway. I've seen him reach for you when he's scared or tired, or just wants comfort. You are his mama, Mel, not because Eleanor isn't his mother, but because love doesn't have limits." Melissa felt tears threatening, the good kind that come when something you've been afraid to hope for suddenly seems possible. "But it's more than that," Anthony said, moving closer to where she sat on the floor. "For it's watching you become yourself again. You were broken when I met you, and I was broken too. But together, taking care of Brian, we've been healing each other." He knelt down beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "The investor meeting went well because I wasn't thinking about Elena for the first time in 8 months, he admitted. "I was thinking about you and Brian waiting for me at home. I was thinking about how I couldn't wait to tell you about the funding, to see you smile, to watch Brian try to grab my tie when I pick him up." "Anthony," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you," he said, the words simple and devastating. "I love how you make Brian laugh, how you argue with me about the right way to fold his clothes, how you hum while you're cooking dinner. I love that you're practical and sarcastic and beautiful and strong enough to survive losing everything and still have room in your heart for us." Brian chose that moment to make a demanding sound, reaching his little arms toward them both. Melissa picked him up automatically, and Anthony's hand covered hers where it rested on Brian's back. "I love you too," she said, the words coming out in a rush before she could lose her nerve. "I love you both so much it terrifies me. I never thought I'd be able to feel this way again after my marriage fell apart. But you two, You've made me believe in family again." Anthony's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "So what do we do now?" Melissa looked down at Brian, who was looking between them with that serious baby expression, as if he understood the importance of the moment. "Now we stop pretending this is temporary," she said. "Now we stop being afraid of calling this what it is." "And what is it?" Anthony asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. "It's love," she said simply. "Messy and complicated and scary and real. It's a family that doesn't look like what either of us planned, but it's ours." Anthony leaned forward and kissed her, soft and gentle, while Brian babbled approvingly between them. When they broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "There's something else," Anthony said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Melissa's breath caught. "I know it's crazy," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I know we've only been together for 2 months, but I also know that I want to wake up next to you every morning, and I want Brian to call you Mama for real, and I want to build a life with you that's bigger than either of us imagined." But before Melissa could answer, Brian started crying, and this time, it wasn't the kind of crying that stopped when she held him. Brian's cries weren't stopping, and within minutes, Melissa realized this wasn't about hunger or sleepiness, but something that would test everything she and Anthony had just confessed to each other. "Something's wrong," Melissa said, her voice cutting through the romantic moment like cold steel. Brian's wails had an edge she'd never heard before, desperate and pained. She pressed her hand to his forehead, feeling the heat radiating from his small body. "Anthony, he's burning up!" The velvet ring box fell forgotten to the floor as Anthony jumped to his feet. "How high?" Melissa was already moving toward the nursery, her practical instincts overriding everything else. "Get the thermometer from his diaper bag. Now." The digital thermometer from CVS beeped ominously, 102.8 degrees. Brian's little face was flushed red, and his cries had taken on a quality that made Melissa's chest tight with fear she hadn't felt since Marcus's NICU days. "We need to get him to the hospital," she said, already grabbing the diaper bag with one hand while supporting Brian with the other. "Northwestern Memorial. Dr. Chen said to bring him straight to the ER if his fever went over 101. Anthony was pulling on his shoes, his face pale. "So should we call 911? Faster if we drive," Melissa said, wrapping Brian in a light blanket. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Months of medical appointments with Marcus had taught her to function in crisis mode. "Bring your insurance card and his medical records." The ride in Anthony's Tesla felt endless, even though Northwestern Memorial was only 12 minutes away. Melissa sat in the back with Brian, who had stopped crying and was now making weak, whimpering sounds that somehow felt worse than the screaming. "Talk to me, baby," she murmured, stroking his fevered cheek. "Stay with Mama, okay? We're going to make you feel better." Anthony caught her eye in the rearview mirror. Even in crisis, the word Mama felt right, felt true. The emergency department at Northwestern Memorial was controlled chaos. Bright lights, nurses in scrubs moving with practiced efficiency, the smell of antiseptic that brought back too many memories for Melissa. But when she approached the triage desk with Brian, everything happened fast. 6-month-old male, fever 102.8, lethargic, she told the nurse, her voice clinical and clear. No recent illness, up to date on vaccines, breastfed. The nurse took one look at Brian and immediately led them to a pediatric examination room. Within minutes, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the pediatric emergency physician, was examining Brian with gentle but thorough hands. "How long has he had the fever?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, using a specialized thermometer in Brian's ear. "We first noticed it about 30 minutes ago," Melissa replied. 103.2 now. He was fine this afternoon at his regular checkup with Dr. Chen. Anthony stood beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. "Is it serious?" "Fevers in babies this young are always concerning," Dr. Rodriguez said honestly. "We need to run some tests to rule out bacterial infection. Blood work, urine sample, possibly a lumbar puncture if his white count is elevated." Melissa felt her knees go weak. Lumbar puncture, spinal tap. The same word she'd heard in Marcus's NICU, words that meant they were looking for meningitis or other serious infections. "Hey," Anthony said quietly, his arm going around her waist. "He's going to be okay. He's strong, and he's got the best advocate in the world taking care of him." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and waiting. Brian screamed during the blood draw, his tiny veins difficult to find. Melissa held him through each test, humming gospel songs under her breath while tears streamed down her face. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," she whispered against his sweaty forehead. "That saved a wretch like me." Anthony paced the small room, checking his phone obsessively, calling Dr. Chen's after-hours line twice for reassurance. But every few minutes, he'd come back to where Melissa sat with Brian, his hand touching her shoulder or stroking Brian's hair. "Text from Janny," Melissa said, checking her cracked iPhone screen. "Girl, you missed our Tuesday FaceTime. Everything okay?" She typed back quickly. "Brian's sick, at Northwestern ER. We'll call later." Janny's response was immediate. "OMG, on my way." "You don't have to deal with visitors right now," Anthony said, reading over her shoulder. "She's family," Melissa replied simply. "And Brian needs all the people who love him praying right now." At 11:47 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez returned with Brian's test results. Melissa's hand found Anthony's automatically, both of them bracing for the worst. "Good news," the doctor said, and Melissa felt her entire body sag with relief. "Blood work is normal, urine is clear. This appears to be a viral infection, probably something he picked up from another baby or child. His immune system is doing exactly what it should, so he's going to be okay," Anthony asked, his voice thick with emotion. "He's going to be fine," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. "Fever should break in the next day or two. Tylenol for comfort, plenty of fluids, and follow up with Dr. Chen if it gets worse or lasts more than 3 days. Brian had fallen asleep in Melissa's arms during the doctor's explanation, his breathing steady and peaceful for the first time in hours. His fever had already started to come down, 101.2 on the last check. In the quiet of the hospital room, Anthony sank into the chair beside Melissa's. "I've never been that scared in my life," he admitted. "Not even when Elena was in surgery. This was different. Because he's your son," Melissa said softly. "Because you love him. Because I couldn't imagine losing him," Anthony replied. "And I couldn't imagine going through it without you." Melissa looked down at Brian, sleeping so trustingly in her arms, his tiny fist wrapped around her finger. "When I was sitting here, holding him through those tests, all I could think was how this is what love looks like. Not the easy moments, not the Instagram-worthy pictures, but showing up when everything is scary and uncertain." Anthony pulled the forgotten ring box from his pocket, setting it gently on the hospital table beside them. "Melissa Renee Clark," he said quietly, "will you marry me? Will you be Brian's mama for real, legally and officially? Will you build a family with us that can handle whatever comes next?" Through her tears, Melissa looked at this man who'd found her in a coffee shop when they were both broken, who'd trusted her with his most precious gift, who'd stood beside her through crisis without hesitation. "Yes," she whispered, "yes to all of it." Anthony slipped the simple, elegant ring onto her finger just as Janae burst through the hospital room door, still in her pajamas and looking frantic. "How's my baby?" Janny demanded, then stopped short when she saw the ring. "Oh my God, girl, did you just get engaged in the emergency room?" Melissa laughed through her tears, holding Brian close while Anthony's arm encircled them both. Apparently, this family does everything the hard way. But looking around at the people who'd shown up for her, Anthony, Brian, Janny, even the kind hospital staff, she realized that sometimes the most beautiful families are built from the most unexpected moments. 6 months later, Melissa stood in the bathroom of their new apartment, staring at a pregnancy test that would change everything they thought they knew about their perfect life. The 2 pink lines stared back at her, impossible to deny. Her hands shook as she set the test on the counter beside the engagement ring that still felt new on her finger. Through the bathroom door, she could hear Anthony's voice mixing with Brian's happy babbling as they played in the living room of their Lincoln Park apartment, the place they'd chosen together, big enough for a family but cozy enough to feel like home. This can't be happening, she thought, her mind racing. Not now, when everything was finally falling into place. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of healing and building. She'd quit her job at Brewhaven and started taking online classes in early childhood development, funded by Anthony's insistence that her education was an investment in their family's future. Brian was thriving, walking now, saying mama and dada with equal enthusiasm, charming everyone at Millennium Park during their weekend picnics. Their wedding was planned for next month, a small ceremony at the same church in Bronzeville where Melissa had rediscovered her faith, followed by a reception with close friends and family. Even Eleanor's sister had reached out, wanting to meet the woman who'd brought light back into Brian's and Anthony's lives. But now this, another baby, another chance for everything to go wrong. "Mel?" Anthony's voice carried from the living room. "Brian's asking for you. I think he wants his afternoon snack." She splashed cold water on her face, trying to compose herself. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman who'd changed dramatically over the past year, healthier, happier, with a confidence that came from being truly loved. But right now she looked terrified. Walking into the living room, she found Anthony on the floor with Brian, who was now almost a year old and getting into everything. Brian had inherited his father's curious nature and his mother's determination, a combination that kept them constantly entertained and occasionally exhausted. "Mama!" Brian called out, crawling toward her with the speed that still amazed her. She scooped him up automatically, breathing in his familiar baby scent that always calmed her nerves. "How are my boys?" she asked, settling onto the couch with Brian in her lap. "Perfect," Anthony said, joining them. "Brian figured out how to open the cabinet where we keep his toys. Kid's going to be an engineer like his old man." Anthony looked different too, more relaxed, quick to laugh, the permanent worry lines around his eyes replaced by laugh lines. His sustainable energy company had expanded beyond his wildest dreams, but he'd learned to leave work at work, to prioritize dinner time and bedtime stories over late-night emails. "Anthony," Melissa said carefully, "we need to talk about something." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. "What's wrong? You look pale." Brian babbled happily, playing with Melissa's braids, oblivious to the tension suddenly filling their living room. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, the words hanging in the air like a confession. Anthony went very still. "Pregnant. I took 3 tests. They're all positive." Melissa felt tears threatening. "I know we didn't plan this. I know we're still figuring out being married, being Brian's parents. I know it's too soon and too complicated and—" Anthony's hands cupped her face, stopping her panicked words. "Mel, breathe. I'm scared," she whispered. "After what happened with Marcus, after everything we've been through to get here, what if something goes wrong? What if I can't carry this baby to term? What if we're not ready?" Brian, sensing his mama's distress, reached up to pat her cheek with his tiny hand, making soft, comforting sounds. "Look at me," Anthony said gently. "Do you remember what you told me the night Brian got sick? About love not being the easy moments, but showing up when everything is scary and uncertain." Melissa nodded, unable to speak. "I love you," he said simply. "I love Brian, and I'm going to love this baby. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's what families do. But what if everything goes perfectly?" Anthony interrupted. "What if this baby is healthy and strong and gives Brian a sibling to boss around? What if we're better parents this time because we've already learned how to love a child together?" Brian chose that moment to clap his hands, as if applauding his father's speech. The sound made them both laugh despite the emotional weight of the conversation. "Besides," Anthony said, his voice lighter now, "we've gotten pretty good at handling the unexpected." Melissa felt something loosen in her chest, not the complete absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger. Hope, mixed with trust in the man who'd shown her that love could survive anything. "So you're okay with this?" she asked. "I'm terrified," Anthony admitted. "But I'm also excited. Brian's going to be an amazing big brother." As if he understood, Brian looked between his parents and clapped again, making them both smile. 3 weeks later, at their first prenatal appointment with Dr. Sarah Martinez at Northwestern Memorial, they heard their baby's heartbeat for the first time, strong and steady, filling the examination room with the promise of new life. "Everything looks perfect, Doctor," Martinez said, pointing to the ultrasound screen. "Due date is March 15th. Would you like pictures?" Anthony squeezed Melissa's hand as they watched their tiny baby on the monitor, no bigger than a grape, but already loved beyond measure. That evening, they sat on their couch with Brian between them, looking at the ultrasound photos. Brian studied the pictures seriously, as if he understood their importance. "What do you think, buddy?" Anthony asked. "Ty ready to be a big brother?" Brian babbled something that sounded remarkably like baby, making them both laugh. Melissa's phone buzzed with a text from Janai. "Girl, you're glowing in these engagement photos. When are you giving Brian a sibling?" She showed the message to Anthony, who grinned. "Should we tell her?" "Let's wait until after the wedding," Melissa said. "I want one perfect day that's just about us, before we announce we're expanding again." Anthony pulled both of them closer, Brian settling contentedly against his chest, while Melissa curled into his side. Through their living room windows, Chicago sparkled in the distance, the city where they'd found each other, where they'd built a family from broken pieces and impossible circumstances. "I love our life," Melissa said softly. "Even though it's nothing like what either of us planned." "Especially because of that," she replied. "Marcus taught me that love doesn't guarantee a happy ending, but you and Brian taught me that happy endings can come from the most unexpected places." Brian made a sleepy sound, his eyelids getting heavy. Soon he'd be ready for bed, for the nighttime routine they'd perfected over months of practice. Bath time with extra bubbles, stories read in silly voices, lullabies hummed in the dark. "We're going to be okay," Melissa said, not as a question, but as a promise to herself, to Anthony, to their growing family. And for the first time since she'd seen those two pink lines, she truly believed it. 3 years later, Melissa Gabriel stood in the kitchen of their Evanston home, watching through the window as Anthony pushed 2-year-old Sophia on the swing set while 4-year-old Brian demonstrated his superhero jumps from the slide. The late afternoon sunlight caught the highlights in her braids, now styled in a sophisticated updo that reflected her new role as Director of Family Services at a non-profit in downtown Chicago. Her silver bracelet, her mother's bracelet, still caught the light as she moved, but now it was joined by a simple wedding band and the engagement ring that had survived emergency rooms and midnight feedings and everything life had thrown at their unconventional family. "Mama, watch this!" Brian called out, performing an elaborate somersault that made Sophia clap her hands with delight. His blue-grey eyes, so much like his father's, but with Elena's warmth, sparkled with the confidence of a child who'd never doubted he was loved completely. Sophia, with her mother's dark curls and her father's serious expression, pointed toward the house. "Mama!" she called in her clear toddler voice, the word that still made Melissa's heart skip a beat every time she heard it. The pregnancy with Sophia had been different from her loss with Marcus, filled with cautious joy instead of devastating grief, supported by a partner who held her through every moment of fear. When Sophia was born, healthy and strong at Northwestern Memorial, crying loudly enough to fill the delivery room with life, Melissa had finally understood that some stories get second chances. "Dinner in 10 minutes, she called through the open window, earning a wave from Anthony and excited cheers from the children. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janae. "Still on for Sunday brunch. The kids are excited to see their honorary cousins." Melissa smiled, typing back, "Wouldn't miss it." Sophia's been practicing saying Auntie Janae all week. The kitchen smelled of the pot roast she'd learned to make from a recipe Anthony's mother had shared. Elena's favorite meal, she'd been told. It had taken time, but Elena's family had slowly opened their hearts to Melissa, recognizing that loving Brian didn't mean replacing his birth mother, but honoring her memory by giving him the fullest life possible. A framed photo on the kitchen counter showed Elena holding her pregnant belly, smiling with anticipation she'd never get to fulfill. But next to it sat a recent family photo. Anthony, Melissa, Brian, and Sophia at Millennium Park, all of them laughing at something Brian had said, not a replacement for what was lost, but proof that love could grow in the spaces between grief. The front door opened with the chaos that had become their normal. Brian racing in to wash his hands, Sophia toddling after him with grass stains on her Carter's dress, Anthony following with the inevitable collection of outdoor toys that never seemed to make it back to their proper places. "How was your day?" Anthony asked, kissing her cheek as he passed. His hair was slightly grey at the temples now, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at her the way they had that first day in the coffee shop. "Good. The Johnson family finally got approved for adoption. I cried happy tears in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Melissa handed him plates to set on the dining room table. "How was yours?" "The Portland contract came through. We're officially expanding to the West Coast." Anthony grinned. "But more importantly, Brian informed me that he's going to marry his teacher when he grows up." And Sophia learned to say "please" when she wants something. "Peas," Sophia demonstrated from her high chair, clapping her hands. "That's my smart girl," Melissa said, kissing the top of Sophia's curls. As they sat around their dinner table, the one they'd picked out together at IKEA during their first year of marriage, practical but warm, Melissa looked at her family and felt the deep contentment that comes from building something real from broken pieces. Brian was telling an elaborate story about his preschool art project, complete with dramatic gestures that made Sophia giggle. Anthony listened with the patient attention of a father who'd learned to treasure every ordinary moment. and Sophia babbled along, contributing her own commentary in the language only toddlers speak fluently. "What are we grateful for today?" Anthony asked. The dinner tradition they'd started when Brian turned 3. "I'm grateful for my new sneakers with the lights," Brian announced seriously. "And for Mama making the good mac and cheese, not the box kind. I'm grateful for successful client meetings and for coming home to this chaos," Anthony said, reaching over to squeeze Melissa's hand. "Peas," Sophia contributed, which made everyone laugh. "I'm grateful," Melissa said, looking around the table at faces she couldn't have imagined loving this much just a few years ago, for second chances. For families that don't look like what you planned but feel exactly like home, for little boys who teach you to be brave, and little girls who remind you to find joy in everything. After dinner, after baths and stories, and the elaborate bedtime routine that involved 2 different nightlights, 3 stuffed animals, and Brian reading a picture book to Sophia in his most dramatic voice, Melissa and Anthony finally collapsed on their couch. "Tired?" Anthony asked, pulling her close. "The good kind of tired," she replied, settling against his chest, "the kind that comes from a life well lived." Through their living room windows, Evanston stretched peacefully around them, a suburb they'd chosen for its good schools and tree-lined streets, but mostly for the way it felt like possibility. Not the desperate possibility of people running from something, but the settled possibility of people who'd found where they belonged. Melissa's phone buzzed with a notification from her Dailyo app, a habit she'd kept even after the depression lifted, a way of tracking not just moods but moments of gratitude. Tonight she selected the bright green, radiant emoji and added a note, "Perfect ordinary Tuesday with my extraordinary family. Remember when you thought this was temporary?" Anthony asked softly, his fingers playing with her braids. "I remember being terrified that loving you both would break me," she admitted. I never imagined it would make me whole instead." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their house settling around them, the hum of the dishwasher, the soft whisper of the baby monitor, the distant sounds of a neighborhood full of families like theirs, all learning to love each other through the beautiful, messy work of being human. Later that night, as Melissa checked on both children before going to bed, she whispered the same prayer she'd said every night since Sophia was born. "Thank you for trusting me with them. Help me be worthy of this love." Standing in the doorway, watching Brian sleep with his arm protectively around his little sister in her toddler bed that he'd insisted be moved into his room, Melissa realized that some families aren't born. They're built one day at a time, one act of love at a time, one choice to stay at a time. And this family, born from loss and watered with hope, had grown into something more beautiful than any of them had dared to dream. What would you have done in Melissa's place? When life breaks your heart completely, do you have the courage to risk loving again? And if you were Anthony, could you have opened your heart to someone new while still honoring the memory of your first love? Love after loss isn't about replacing what you've lost. It's about discovering that the heart has infinite capacity to love again, differently, but just as deeply. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.